So it's been a highly requested video and one that I'm excited to deliver today. What were the 10 greatest MVP seasons of NBA history? Obviously, everyone's list is going to be different, so let me know your agreements and disagreements in the comments section. First off, let's establish how my list works. The MVP is a regular season award, so that's the only part of the season I'll be factoring into my list. Regardless of how well a player did in the postseason, it won't factor into his ranking on the top 10 list. Just like traditional MVP voting, I will also factor in team success into the rankings, especially in terms of how much that MVP influenced his team's success. So now, before we get into the meat of the list, these are my honorable mentions. Wilt Chamberlain in 1960, who put up monstrous numbers in his rookie season. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, formerly known as Lou Alcindor, in 1971. Michael Jordan in 1991. Kevin Garnett in 2004, LeBron James in 2009, Russell Westbrook in 2017, and Giannis in 2020. I'm sure some of you are already upset, but the show must go on. Number 10. Larry Bird in 1985. This was right in the heart of Larry Bird's prime, as the 28-year-old did everything you would expect from Bird at his best, as he was arguably the best three-point shooter in the league at this point. His court vision and playmaking ability was among the best of the best, and he was a more than capable defender while averaging nearly 30 points a game. With his all-around lethal efficiency, Bird led his Celtics to a league-best 63-19 record, with numbers of 28.7 points, 10.5 rebounds, 6.6 assists, 1.6 steals, and 1.2 blocks on 52.2% shooting. He led the league in minutes, he was the second most efficient three-point shooter in the league, and the only guy ahead of him was Byron Scott, who shot less than half the amount of three-pointers that Bird did, and he was also 8th in the league in rebounds per game and 1st overall at his position. Larry came in strong, but these seasons are the best of the best, so he'll have to settle for just the 10th spot on this list. Number 9. Oscar Robertson in 1964. Other than Russell Westbrook in 2017, this season from Oscar was the closest anyone has ever come to a triple-double MVP season, as he averaged 31.4 points, 9.9 rebounds, and 11 assists on 48.3% shooting. Even in this prime season, he wasn't the most flashy type of player, but he was incredibly smart, fundamentally sound, and dangerous from the mid-range. He was second in the league in scoring, behind only Wilt Chamberlain. He led all players in assists that season, and he also led the league in free throw percentage. He took his Royals to a 55-25 record, which was the second best record in the entire league. It's debatable whether or not this was actually his best season from an individual standpoint, but it was his lone MVP, and it was strong enough to get him into the 9th spot. Number 8. LeBron James in 2013. This wasn't quite LeBron's most monstrous season from a scoring standpoint, but it was definitely the most efficient version of the King that we've ever seen. He put up 26.8 points, 7.3 assists, 8 rebounds, and 1.7 steals on 56.5% shooting. That's basically really great efficiency for a center, but for a wing player, it's absolutely astounding. This was also easily LeBron's greatest season from the three-point line, as he wasn't just solid, but he was actually elite, as he shot 40.6% from that distance. On top of this, LeBron was an absolute force defensively, as the combination of his peak strength and athleticism allowed him to be a stout defender whether he was on a wing or even a big in the post. He finished second overall in the Defensive Player of the Year race, and even that is somewhat questionable considering the fact that the man who beat him only finished on the NBA's second all-defense team. From a team impact standpoint, you can't question how pivotal LeBron's greatness was to his Miami Heat's 66-16 record, which included their 27-game winning streak, which is the second longest streak of NBA history. Number 7. Shaquille O'Neal in 2000. He's certainly the most dominant big man of modern history, and this season was where he was at his best. At this point, Shaq still had most of his athleticism from his Orlando days, but he also put on a tremendous amount of weight and muscle mass. There was little opposing defenders could do to stop him. Sometimes they would hack him on purpose to make him shoot free throws, but the Diesel was so strong that it often ended up being an and-one opportunity anyway. As he led his Lakers to a league-best 67-15 record, he put up 29.7 points, 13.6 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 3 blocks on 57.4% shooting. Not only was he dominant offensively, but he was dominant defensively as well, as his elite rim protection earned him the runner-up spot to the Defensive Player of the Year award. Number 6. Wilt Chamberlain in 1966. Interestingly enough, Wilt Chamberlain's best statistical seasons were actually years that he didn't win the MVP, but even just his pretty good seasons are enough to rank him high on this list. Like this season, for example, as Chamberlain led his 76ers to a 55-25 record with powerful numbers of 33.5 points, 24.6 rebounds, and 5.2 assists on 54% shooting. Steals and blocks were not tracked at that time, but knowing Wilt, if they had been, I'm sure they would have been monstrous as well. Also consider how Philadelphia was one of the best teams defensively that season, and their terrifying anchor in the paint had a ton to do with that. He led all players that season in scoring, rebounding, field goal percentage, and minutes, while also being 7th overall in assists per game. There was very little that Wilt didn't do on the court that season. Number 5. Michael Jordan in 1996. I really don't need to elaborate much on this season from MJ, but I will anyway. His airness led the Bulls to achieve what was at the time the greatest regular season of NBA history with a 72-10 record. In my opinion, this was Jordan's peak in terms of his mastery from the mid-range, as his footwork was clean and precise, and his fadeaway appeared as if it was automatic. Jordan was also just barely outside of the top 10 in three-point efficiency, as he shot a lethal 42.7% from that distance. Throughout the season, he averaged 30.4 points, 4.3 assists, 6.6 rebounds, and 2.2 steals on 49.5% shooting. His 30.4 points led the league in scoring, and what makes it even more impressive is how he scored that many points per game when teams were averaging under 100 points a game. He was also tenacious on the perimeter as usual, as Jordan made first-team all-defense along with his teammates Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman. It's far from his greatest season statistically, but from an overall impact standpoint, and considering how the 96 Bulls are arguably the greatest team ever, 96 Jordan certainly earned his strong position on the list. Number 4. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1972. He was without question the most dominant center in the game at this point, as he was in his prime, equipped with the most unstoppable shot of basketball history, the skyhook. With Oscar Robertson by his side, the Bucks stormed through the regular season with a 63-19 record. Kareem did his part with 34.8 points, 16.6 rebounds, and 4.6 assists on a tremendous 57.4% shooting. It's also worth mentioning that it was his dominant performance that put an end to the Lakers' 33-game winning streak, as he dropped 39 points, 20 rebounds, and 5 assists in the historic victory. Because blocks and steals were not tracked at this point, we don't know for sure what kind of defensive numbers he got this year, but based on his 7 prime seasons after they started tracking blocks and steals, he probably averaged anywhere from 1 to 1.5 steals and 3 to 4 blocks. He led all players in scoring, and this was also the greatest season of NBA history in terms of win shares, as he accumulated 25.4 throughout the regular season. Number 3. Wilt Chamberlain in 1967. At this time in his career, Wilt was just entering his 30s, and he had a massive chip on his shoulder due to the narrative that he didn't make his teammates better. His critics said that Wilt was too selfish to win championships like Bill Russell. Because of this, Wilt began to distribute the basketball more, and despite the fact that he was playing at center, he finished 3rd overall in assists per game with 7.8. A more unselfish Chamberlain meant that he could be more selective with his shots, and it resulted in all-time lethal efficiency. On his 14.2 shots per game, he made a ridiculous 68.3%. Of the players who've attempted at least 10 shots per game, that is easily the highest field goal percentage of NBA history. He played all 81 games that year as he put up 24.1 points, 24.2 rebounds, and 7.8 assists on 68.3% shooting. Not only was he 3rd in assists, but he was also the league's rebounding leader, its field goal percentage leader, and its minutes leader, while leading his 76ers to a 68-13 record, which at the time was the greatest team record of NBA history. Unfortunately, the season wasn't without at least one weakness, as it was also one of his worst seasons from the free throw line, as he shot a terrible 44.1%. Regardless, his all-around impact to his team's historic success is a top 3 MVP season in my humble opinion. Number 2. Steph Curry in 2016. According to most lists, I have this season ranked much higher than others typically do, but I believe it was every bit as impactful as it needed to be to earn the title of the 2nd greatest MVP season of all time. He was fantastic off ball, and his lethal perimeter shooting made all of his teammates better as his range helped spread the floor. On the season, Curry averaged 30.1 points, 6.7 assists, 5.4 rebounds, and 2.1 steals on 50.4% shooting. He also shot a ridiculous 45.4% from three-point range and a league-leading 90.8% from the free throw line, giving him the historic 50-40-90 season. It's also the only 50-40-90 season where the player led the entire league in scoring, which essentially makes this season the pinnacle of efficiency. He made a league record 402 three-pointers on the season, and up to that point, no one had ever made more than 300. To shoot 45.4% on that many three-point attempts is a level of sniping that no one else has ever come close to in the game's history. To put that in perspective, his three-point shooting percentage that season was greater than the career field goal percentage of all-time great scorers like Kobe Bryant, James Harden, and Carmelo Anthony. His unselfish personality and his off-ball movement was the perfect play style and leadership for that Warriors group, and he was the conduit to their historic 73-9 record, which was the greatest regular season of all time. He wasn't necessarily the greatest on-ball defender, but he certainly wasn't a liability, and he actually led all players in steals that season with his 2.1. He may have been on the greatest regular season team, and he was the only unanimous MVP the league has ever seen, but he'll have to settle for just the runner-up spot on this list. Number 1. Michael Jordan in 1988. It wouldn't be a championship year, but from an individual standpoint, Jordan was never better than he was in the 87-88 season. On the year, he put up an all-time great 35 points, 5.9 assists, 5.5 rebounds, 3.2 steals, and 1.6 blocks on 53.5% shooting. To average 35 points on 53.5% shooting is remarkable. To do that as a guard is absolutely insane. The thing about 88 MJ is that as good as he was on offense, he was just as good on defense. He was suffocating the opponent with his crowding on-ball defense. His 3.2 steals led the league that season, and it's actually the 8th highest single-season average of all time. Despite being a guard, he was also 16th among all players in blocked shots. His total of 131 blocks on the season is still easily the highest amount of blocks by a guard in NBA history. This defensive effort earned him that season's Defensive Player of the Year award, and Jordan is still the only player to win the scoring title and the Defensive Player of the Year in the same season. With this GOAT season, Jordan carried his team to a 50-32 record, which was the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference. The second highest scorer on the team was averaging barely a third of the points that Jordan was contributing. The next best players on Chicago at this point were probably Charles Oakley and Dave Corzine, which is very far from a Hall of Fame supporting cast. Essentially, this Chicago squad had absolutely no business winning 50 games or being a 3rd seed in a much stronger Eastern Conference. But when you have a GOAT MVP season like Jordan did, I guess anything is possible after all. There's almost certainly no way you agreed with this entire list, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Now before we get into the list, let me establish my one rule of this list. Each player only gets one spot on the list, so I will only rank a player's best season in which he didn't win the MVP award. This should give a nice variety to the list and make the video a bit more interesting because otherwise 80% of this list would be made up of just 2 players. Also, these are the honorable mentions of the greatest non-MVP seasons that didn't make the list. Let me know which one of these had the best case to make it into the top 10. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 10. Dwayne Wade in the 08-09 season. LeBron James won the MVP award this season thanks to his team's superior record. Not only was Wade's campaign the second best season overall that year, but it was also the best season of Wade's career from an individual standpoint, as he put up all-around monstrous numbers of 30.2 points, 7.5 assists, 5 rebounds, 2.2 steals, and 1.3 blocks on 49.1% shooting. Wade was the NBA scoring champion that season while maintaining his elite efficiency. He was also a dominant force on defense as he finished on the NBA's second all-defense team. But I would actually argue that he should have been on the first team, as Wade's 1.3 blocks was good enough to have him finish in the 16th spot among all players, and he was the only guard in the entire league to make the top 20. His 2.2 steals were second overall among all players as well. Statistically, there's very few aspects where Wade didn't dominate on the court. It comes as no surprise as the 27-year-old was still in his prime in terms of his speed and athleticism. He would have seriously challenged LeBron for the award if it wasn't for his team's 43-39 record that season, which held his case back regardless of his individual prowess. Number 9. James Harden in the 18-19 season. As many of you already know, he narrowly and controversially lost this award to Giannis despite having one of the most dominant scoring seasons of all time, as he put up a league-leading 36.1 points, 7.5 assists, 6.6 rebounds, and 2 steals on 44.2% shooting. Let me give you a couple of facts to emphasize how historic this season was for Harden offensively. With a minimum of 50 games played, Harden's 36.1 points makes him the third highest scorer of all time, trailing only seasons from Michael Jordan and Wilt Chamberlain. He had a streak of 32 straight games where he scored at least 30 points, which trails only the streak of Wilt Chamberlain. Harden also averaged 8.1 more points than the closest competitor that season, which was Paul George. The only player to have a greater margin to win the scoring crown was once again Wilt Chamberlain in 1962 and 1963. He also led all players this season in three-pointers made and in overall win shares. His 378 three-pointers made in a season is still the second most of all time. He led his Rockets to a successful 53-29 record, and when you consider all of the skills he displayed this season, in combination with all of the history he made, this will certainly remain as one of the greatest MVP snubs of all time. Number 8. Oscar Robertson in the 61-62 season. Imagine leading your team to a winning record, averaging a 30-point triple-double over the course of a season, which no other player had ever done before, and you only finished third in the NBA's MVP race. That's the insanely unfortunate circumstance that Oscar found himself in at the end of the 1962 season. Other than several seasons by Russell Westbrook, this was the only triple-double average that the league had ever seen, as he finished 5th in scoring, 1st in assists, and 9th in rebounds, as he led his Royals to a 43-37 record. Number 7. LeBron James in the 17-18 season. This season, Cleveland dealt with almost every form of team drama imaginable, as injuries, personnel changes, and chemistry issues plagued the team throughout the season. Despite their troubles, LeBron found a way to carry his Cavs to a 50-32 record for the 4th best record in the Eastern Conference. He did it with averages of 27.2 points, 8.6 rebounds, 9.1 assists, and 1.4 steals on a very efficient 54.2% from the field. What he went on to do in the playoffs was absolutely incredible, and if the postseason was included, this 2018 campaign would be ranked even higher. But without it, it's just good enough to make the 7th spot on my list. Number 6. Hakeem Olajuwon in the 92-93 season. It was the season before the Dream started collecting his championship rings, but from an individual standpoint, you could argue that this was the best version of him that we had ever seen, as he put up insane all-around numbers of 26.1 points, 13 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.8 steals, and 4.2 blocks on 52.9% shooting. His quick hands and dominant rim protection earned him that season's Defensive Player of the Year award, and the voting wasn't even that close on that one. Charles Barkley was the winner of that season's MVP award, but that was mostly due to the Suns' best record in the league, and not because of his superior production, because Hakeem certainly had the edge in that aspect. Let me put his all-around dominance in perspective. This era was absolutely stacked with big men, and was probably the strongest era of the center position that the game has ever seen. Regardless of that fact, among centers, Hakeem was 1st in scoring, 2nd in rebounds, 3rd in assists, 1st in steals, and 1st in blocks. Combine that with the skill and artistry in which he did it, and it's definitely one of the greatest MVP snubs of all time. Number 5. Kobe Bryant in the 05-06 season. The Lakers finished this season with a 45-37 record in a tough Western Conference, which is almost never enough wins to earn an MVP award. But I would argue that these Lakers had no business winning that many games in the first place. Outside of Kobe and Lamar Odom, the Lakers who started the most games were Smush Parker, Kwame Brown, Chris Mim, and Luke Walton. To simply say that Kobe carried this group would be an understatement on a biblical level. On the year, Kobe averaged a league-leading 35.4 points, 5.3 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 1.8 steals on 45% shooting. When Kobe put up 35.4 points per game, he did it during one of the lowest scoring seasons in NBA history, as teams were averaging only 97 points per game, which means Kobe equaled 36.5% of a team's average in points that season. That's the greatest percentage of offense since the NBA merger in 1976. Not only was he a one-man show on offense, but he was the best defender at his position as he made first-team All-Defense. Kobe is the only player in league history to officially average over 35 points per game while also making first-team All-Defense in the same season. Throw in his iconic 81-point game, 55 points and a half, and 62 points in 3 quarters, and I'm very comfortable putting this season in the top 5. Number 4. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the 72-73 season. Dave Cowens of the Boston Celtics was awarded that season's MVP in large part as a reward for their 68-14 record. Kareem's Bucks had an inferior 60-22 record, but by just about every individual metric, he was on a level above Cowens, as Kareem put up 30.2 points, 16.1 rebounds, and 5 assists on 55.4% shooting. Blocked shots were not officially tracked until the following season, but over those next 7 years, Kareem averaged 3.5 blocks per game, so it's probably fair to guess that his average was around the same this season. He was by far that season's leader in both win shares and in player efficiency rating. Maybe voter fatigue played somewhat of a part that season, as this would have been Kareem's 3rd straight MVP award. But no matter how you look at it outside of the team's record, he was easily the greatest player that season. Number 3. Larry Bird in the 87-88 season. Michael Jordan won the award in 1988 and had arguably the greatest MVP campaign of all time. And unfortunately for Larry, he had his personal greatest season that same year, and with this same performance, Larry would have won the MVP in 95% of the other NBA seasons. He led his Celtics to the 1st seed in the Eastern Conference with a record of 57-25. On the year, he averaged about 30 points, 9.3 rebounds, 6.1 assists, and 1.6 steals on 52.7% shooting. Offensively, this was among the most efficient seasons of all time, as Larry had well over 50-40-90 percentages, which only 9 players have ever done in NBA history. And other than Steph Curry in 2016, no one has ever averaged more points than Larry did while eclipsing 50-40-90 percentages. This perimeter efficiency wasn't without volume, as he was 5th in field goals attempted and 4th overall in 3-pointers attempted. As far as the regular season goes, this was the very peak of Larry Legend's powers. Number 2. Michael Jordan in the 88-89 season. Magic Johnson certainly wasn't a bad choice to win the MVP in 1989, as he put up strong numbers and led his Showtime Lakers to the best record in their conference. But this was also one of the best versions of Michael Jordan that we had ever seen from an individual standpoint, as he poured in 32.5 points, 8 rebounds, 8 assists, and 2.9 steals on 53.8% shooting. In the final third of the season, Doug Collins moved Jordan to the point guard position. During that time as the point guard, Jordan had a streak where he had 7 straight triple-doubles and 10 triple-doubles in 11 games. That 7 straight triple-doubles is a streak that's only been eclipsed by Russell Westbrook and Wilt Chamberlain. As usual, Jordan was also the best defender at his position as he made first-team All-Defense. On the year, he was 1st in win shares, 1st in player efficiency rating, and 1st in plus-minus. There's almost no aspects where he wasn't dominating the opponent this season. Number 1. Wilt Chamberlain in the 61-62 season. The top spot comes as no surprise, as Chamberlain's greatest season featured averages that would be difficult to eclipse even in video games. Other than a game where he was ejected by the ref, he played in every single minute that regular season, and he destroyed his opponent on a nightly basis as he averaged 50.4 points, 25.7 rebounds, and 2.4 assists on 50.6% shooting. No one else has ever averaged over 40 points in a season, and Wilt Chamberlain eclipsed 50. Also, no one has ever averaged as many rebounds as Wilt did this season. I could go on and on, giving incredible facts about this season, but the truth is, it would take too long and isn't completely necessary, as the majority of Wilt Chamberlain's greatest achievements came from this season, including his 100-point game in Hershey, Pennsylvania. We don't have his official blocks averages this season, but based on the fact that he later averaged 8.8 per game in his twilight years, there's a real possibility he averaged double-digit blocks this season to go along with his other goofy numbers. Despite being on a less talented squad compared to the other teams atop of the league, he was still able to lead his Warriors to a 49-31 record, and as a result of all of this season sits comfortably as the greatest non-MVP season of all time. So what were the 10 greatest Finals MVP performances of NBA history? Well, this list is somewhat subjective, but I think I've put together a pretty good one. First, let me establish a couple details about this list. The Finals MVP award was introduced to the league in 1969, which unfortunately means that a Wilt Chamberlain performance and all of Bill Russell's performances will not be considered for the list. Yeah, it sucks, but I want to stick to the official MVP awards, and if you would like to see these legends get some love, there's plenty of other videos that do that on this channel. Also consider the fact that these are the greatest Finals performances from the greatest players of all time. So just because a specific performance doesn't make the top 10 list doesn't mean that I didn't think it was great, or even that I didn't think it was amazing. It just means that the bar is set absurdly high. Number 10, Dwayne Wade in 2006. It was a finals matchup between the Dallas Mavericks and Wade's Miami Heat. After Dallas took a commanding 2-0 lead in the series, that's when the dynamic 24-year-old took his game to the next level and dominated the series from that point on, in what was described at the time as a Jordan-esque type performance. On the series, Wade averaged 34.7 points, 7.8 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 2.7 steals on 46.8% shooting. 3 out of the final 4 games of the series were decided by only one basket, and Wade's clutch gene was certainly the deciding factor in the series. Now you could argue that Wade should be higher on the list, but there's a lot of controversy tied to this series in terms of its refereeing, and this series from Wade holds the finals record for the most free throw attempts in a 6-game series with 97. Shaquille O'Neal in 2000 is in second place with 93 free throws, and remember, he had the hack-a-Shaq strategy helping him get that high. In Game 5 alone, Wade shot 25 free throws, while the entire Dallas Mavericks team shot 25 free throws as well. So again, it's an incredibly impressive performance from Wade, but due to the questions of its legitimacy, I'm afraid I can't rank him any higher than the 10th spot. Number 9, Magic Johnson in 1987. The 1987 Finals was the third and final matchup of that decade between the Lakers and Celtics. Offensively, Magic dominated this series in as many ways as possible, as it was one of the strongest dual-threat series the league has ever seen in terms of his scoring and facilitating. He was also ridiculously efficient, as he shot 54.1% from the field and 96% from the free throw line. On the series, he put up 26.2 points, 13 assists, 8 rebounds, and 2.3 steals. Despite his pass-first tendencies, he actually led all players in scoring in 3 out of the 6 games that series. He also had the iconic game-winning baby skyhook in the crucial 4th game in Boston Garden. Magic ultimately led his Showtime Lakers to win the series in 6 games, and it was such a dominant performance that even Larry Bird basically conceded that Magic was the best player in the game at that point. Number 8, Shaquille O'Neal in 2002. It was the 3rd championship of the Shaq and Kobe three-peat, and New Jersey basically never stood a chance, and the biggest reason for that was the fact that they had absolutely no answer for the Diesel, as he dominated with 36.3 points, 12.3 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 2.8 blocks on 59.5% shooting. As a result of his presence and power in the paint, all of New Jersey's bigs were consistently in foul trouble. And to top it off, Shaq hit 45 of his 68 free throw attempts during the series, which is 66.2%. That's certainly not elite, but by Shaquille O'Neal standards, that's fantastic. His 145 points over the course of the series is the most points ever scored in an NBA Finals sweep. Number 7, Michael Jordan in 1991. This was the highly anticipated matchup between Magic and Michael, the Los Angeles Lakers and the Chicago Bulls. The Lakers took the first game, but after that point, Jordan began to take control, and the Bulls never looked back, winning the next 4 games straight. At one crucial stretch in Game 2, Jordan hit 13 straight field goals without a miss, and finished the game with 33, 13, and 7 on a ridiculous 83% shooting. On the series as a whole, he averaged 31.2 points, 11.4 assists, 6.6 rebounds, 2.8 steals, and 1.4 blocks on 55.8% shooting.
What's incredible is how he destroyed the competition at different points with his scoring and then with his facilitating, as Jordan averaged only one less assist than Magic did during the series, while being more efficient and outscoring him by nearly 13 points per game. It's worth mentioning that Jordan also hit the most crucial shot of the series, where he made this game-tying basket, which forced Game 3 to overtime, where they eventually prevailed. Number 6. Hakeem Olajuwon in 1995. In what was expected to be a colossal battle with Shaquille O'Neal and the Orlando Magic, Hakeem proved why he was the best and most skilled big man in the game, as he had a tremendous impact on almost every aspect of the game. On the series, he put up 32.8 points, 11.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks on 48.3% shooting. The Dream led his Rockets to sweep the Orlando Magic, and he led all players in scoring in each of the 4 games. Considering the fact that they were only the 6th seed, this was one of the more improbable champions of NBA history, but it also speaks volumes about Olajuwon's clutch gene in the postseason. Number 5. Tim Duncan in 2003. It was a finals matchup between Tim Duncan's Spurs and the New Jersey Nets. Many people didn't witness this remarkable performance, as the 2003 championship was one of the least viewed NBA finals of league history. But those who did see it fortunately got to see the great Tim Duncan at his very best. In this series, he put up a monstrous 24.2 points, 17 rebounds, 5.3 assists, and 5.3 blocks on 49.5% shooting. The Nets had no answer for him anywhere on the court, as he started off the series in Game 1 with 32 points, 20 rebounds, 6 assists, and 7 blocks in a 12-point victory. But the way he closed out the series was arguably even more impressive. In the championship-clinching 6th game, he had 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks, nearly getting the historic quadruple-double. But there's actually some controversy tied to this game, as many people believe that 2 more blocked shots should have gone to Duncan. Only 4 players in league history have ever achieved the quadruple-double, and no one has done it in the playoffs. But if these 2 blocks had counted toward Tim Duncan's total, then this would have been a quadruple-double on the game's biggest stage and in the final game of the season. That's legendary stuff, to say the least. Number 4. Shaquille O'Neal in 2001. It was the second of the Lakers' 3 straight championships, and Shaq was his usual dominant self on both ends of the court. He absolutely destroyed the Philadelphia Bigs with 33 points, 15.8 rebounds, 4.8 assists, and 3.4 blocks on 57.3% shooting. Shaq bullying the opponent in the paint and putting up these numbers over a 5-game series is impressive enough as is. But what makes it even more astonishing is how he did this up against that season's Defensive Player of the Year, Dikembe Mutombo, and he was still unstoppable and wasn't even contained in the slightest. On the other end, the 76ers were struggling to score in the paint, as Shaq's contested shots and his 3.4 blocks was his personal best in the finals. Number 3. LeBron James in 2016. It's hard to overstate how incredible this finals performance was from the King. A comeback from a 3-1 deficit, making one of the most iconic defensive plays of all time in the closing moments, to defeat the greatest regular season team ever, the 73-9 Warriors, while delivering the first and only championship in Cleveland Cavaliers history. Over the course of that 7-game series, he put up 29.7 points, 11.3 rebounds, 8.9 assists, 2.6 steals, and 2.3 blocks on 49.4% shooting. This is the only time in NBA Finals history where a player has led both teams in all 5 major stat categories. Offensively, defensively, and in the clutch situations, this was a legacy-defining moment for LeBron. Number 2. Michael Jordan in 1993. It was a matchup against Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns, where the Bulls secured their 3rd straight championship in 6 games, and Jordan was arguably never better than he was in these finals. To his credit, Barkley had an incredible series of his own, but it hardly mattered because Jordan was simply on another level. On the series, he put up 41 points, 8.5 rebounds, 6.3 assists, and 1.7 steals on 50.8% shooting. He led all 6 games in scoring, he scored over 40 points in 4 straight games, including a 55-point performance in a close Game 4 victory, and his 41 points per game is the highest average of NBA Finals history. Dan Marley of the Phoenix Suns was a strong 6'6" wing who was on the NBA's second all-defense team that season, which makes him the second best defender at his position this season. But the reality is, Michael Jordan made him look like a bad defender because of how brutally he dominated him. If Jordan had just a pretty good series, then there's a good chance that the Bulls would have lost. But because he had what some consider the greatest finals performance of all time, Chicago was able to close it out in 6 games. Number 1. Shaquille O'Neal in 2000. Every once in a while, I go back and I watch this series, and it leaves me in awe each time, especially the first 2 games. In my opinion, no player has ever had a greater impact and influence on a final series than Shaq did in 2000. Over the 6 games, he averaged 38 points, 16.7 rebounds, 2.3 assists, and 2.7 blocks on 61.1% shooting. He led all 6 games in scoring, he led 5 out of the 6 games in rebounding, and he led 5 out of the 6 games in blocked shots. The Lakers' game plan was obvious heading into the series, as they ran the offense almost completely through the diesel, and yet Indiana still couldn't slow him down, regardless of Rick Smits even having several inches on Shaq. He controlled the momentum of the game, its tempo, its physicality, and even seemingly the spirits of the opponent, as Indiana appeared demoralized at times during the opening games of Shaq's 40-point and 20-rebound performances. Between the 12 Pacers on the roster, they had a total of 159 personal fouls over the course of the 6 games, and of the 5 players who spent time guarding Shaq, they counted for 102 of those fouls. As a result, Shaq completely disrupted their rotations, as there was almost no aspect of the game where his influence couldn't be seen on the court. Kobe had his iconic moment in Game 4, where he sealed the game after Shaq fouled out. But other than that instance, Kobe had a terrible series, averaging only 15 points on 36.7% shooting. The biggest help that Shaq had was all the shooters he freed up by drawing the extra attention, by having the defense collapse upon him. So in a sense, Shaq even deserves some credit for their success as well. When you consider production and overall positive impact on the game, 2000 Shaq is my choice for the greatest Finals MVP of all time.
The Finals MVP award was introduced to the NBA in 1969, and since then, many incredibly deserving players have taken home the award. With that being said, not every award winner was universally agreed upon by the basketball community. Today, I've put together my list of the biggest Finals MVP snubs in basketball history, and let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with my rankings. Number 5. JoJo White over Dave Cowens in 1976. This was a 6-game series where the Celtics defeated the Phoenix Suns 4-2, securing their second championship in 3 years. JoJo White was the Celtics starting point guard, and he's an NBA Hall of Famer. JoJo had some really great performances throughout the series, like in Game 5 when he played a total of 60 minutes in a triple overtime victory. In that contest, he dropped 33 points, 9 assists, and 6 rebounds on 52% shooting. That game specifically is known to many people as, quote, the greatest game ever played. Obviously, being the standout performer in one of the most iconic games of basketball history will certainly help your chances of securing the Finals MVP. The thing is, JoJo was pretty inconsistent throughout that series, and had some really disappointing nights as well. Like in Game 2, when he shot only 2 of 12 from the field, and in the championship clinching game, he was only 5 of 15. Cowens, on the other hand, was much more consistent in his production throughout that series. And when you look at their numbers side by side, it seems pretty clear that Cowens was the more deserving player. Another thing to consider is how rebounding was one of the major deciding factors in this series, as Boston significantly out-rebounded the Suns throughout the finals, which translated to more possessions and more second chance opportunities. Obviously, the player who deserves the most credit for that was Dave Cowens, as he averaged a monstrous 16.3 rebounds per game. JoJo White certainly wasn't the most awful choice, which is why this is only the 5th spot on my list. But when you look at the series as a whole, it seems at least somewhat clear that Cowens was in fact the correct choice. Number 4. James Worthy over Magic Johnson in 1988. Now let me be clear, James Worthy is my second favorite player of all time, just behind Kobe Bryant. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, I used to play basketball with my swimming goggles on, just because I wanted to look like Big Game James. So obviously, it's not easy for me to say that Magic was the more deserving player, but it's the honest truth. These finals were a hard-fought 7-game series between the Lakers and the Detroit Pistons,
And the 7th game was one of the all-time great classics, where James Worthy definitely stood out amongst the crowd. Now there's 2 reasons why I believe they gave this award to Worthy instead of Magic. The first is voter fatigue. This was the Lakers' 5th championship of the decade, and Magic had already been given the Finals MVP award 3 times, including the previous season where they had just defeated the Boston Celtics in the finals. When a player starts winning a voting-based award over and over again, people start to look around in order to find a new suitable candidate for the award. In this case, James Worthy fit the bill. The other reason why I believe the voters picked Worthy over Magic is because the voters tend to put too much emphasis on the final impressions. Like I said earlier, James Worthy was clearly the best player on the court for the deciding 7th game, as he put up a jaw-dropping stat line of 36 points, 16 rebounds, and 10 assists on 68% shooting. So yeah, he was the most impressive player in the most suspenseful game of that season. But the thing is, Magic was clearly the better and more impactful player throughout the vast majority of the series. Here are the averages in the 1988 finals next to one another, and with this, you can clearly see that Magic should have the edge. But it gets the point across even better if we look at each game individually. In Game 1, Magic was clearly the better player, as Worthy was unusually inefficient. In Game 2, it was a legitimate toss-up. In Game 3, Magic was better. It's also worth mentioning that Magic put up these solid performances while battling the flu in Games 2 and 3. In Game 4, it wasn't even close, as Worthy basically disappeared this night, missing much of the game due to foul trouble, which is a major reason why Detroit got the blowout victory. Again, in Game 5, the edge goes to Magic, who dished out a remarkable 17 assists. In Game 6, Magic nearly had 20 assists to go along with his 22 points. Finally, in Game 7, we have a game where Worthy was clearly the better player, and working in his favor was the fact that it was the last impression of the series. As much as I love Big Game James, and as big as he was in the clutch, Magic was clearly the more deserving player based on the series as a whole. Number 3. Cedric Maxwell over Larry Bird in 1981. This was a 6-game series where the Celtics defeated the Houston Rockets 4 games to 2. Cedric "Cornbread" Maxwell is an underrated player and someone who was truly impactful for the Celtics throughout the playoffs. He was the Celtics' leading scorer and was extremely efficient while doing it. On the other hand, Larry impacted the game in more ways than Maxwell did. Here's the 2 players' stats next to one another. And although it's clear that Maxwell was better at scoring this series, Bird led both teams in assists and steals, while being an absolute beast on the boards. In fact, he averaged roughly double the amount of rebounds of his 7-foot center teammate Robert Parrish. Rebounding was a huge point of emphasis heading into this series, since the Rockets had one of the greatest rebounders of all time, Moses Malone. Because of Bird, the Celtics out-rebounded the Rockets over the course of the series, regardless of the fact that Houston had the league's leading rebounder. Not only was Larry running the Celtics offense as the main facilitator, but without Bird's presence and grit under the rim, the Celtics certainly lose their rebounding advantage, and probably end up losing the series as well. Maybe there's an angle for the Celtics' leading scorer, but when you consider the context of the series and all the various ways Bird impacted the game, he seems to be the clear choice to me in 1981. Number 2. Andre Iguodala over Steph Curry in 2015. This was a 6-game series where the Golden State Warriors defeated an extremely short-handed Cavaliers team. This is recent enough history that I'm sure most of you will remember it. Plain and simple, giving the award to Andre Iguodala was a narrative-based move, and the argument itself was one of the dumbest narratives I've ever heard. The voters gave Iguodala the award mostly for the solid job he did defensively on LeBron James. Now, did he do a decent job defending LeBron? Absolutely, but I also think it was extremely overblown. LeBron shot only 39.8% over the course of the series. With that being said, he did nearly average a 35-point triple-double over the course of the finals, so it's not like he completely shut him down. On the other hand, you have Steph Curry, who was clearly more productive than Iggy was, in a variety of ways. If you want to give the efficiency edge to Iguodala, don't. It seems like many people have forgotten this, but Iguodala was a major liability from the free throw line this series. Out of all of the Golden State players, Iggy had the second most free throw attempts overall, and he shot a pathetic 34.7% over the course of the finals. Just to emphasize how bad that truly was, consider how Shaquille O'Neal is famous for his terrible free throw shooting, yet his percentage in the finals is tremendously higher than Iggy's was this series. Honestly, I remember being dumbfounded at the end of the finals that they gave the MVP to the guy I've been watching throw up uncontested bricks all series. Because of the boneheaded move of giving the award to Iguodala, this built up a negative narrative about Curry never winning a finals MVP, which wasn't completely destroyed until Curry finally won the award in 2022. But the truth is, that narrative never should have been a thing in the first place, because Curry was clearly the more deserving player in 2015. Number 1. Wes Unseld over Elvin Hayes in 1978. This was a hard-fought 7-game series that ultimately saw the Washington Bullets defeat the Seattle Supersonics. Yesterday, I went back and watched much of this series, just to try to figure out what the heck the voters were thinking when they gave the award to Unseld over Hayes. And to this day, I can confidently say that I still have no idea. Wes Unseld certainly had a solid impact on the Bullets' chances, and he was viewed as the leading veteran on that team. But let's be honest, he wasn't even close to being the best player in these finals. When you look at their numbers side by side, Hayes absolutely crushes this comparison, as he averaged more than double his amount of points per game, more rebounds, way more steals, and way more blocks. The only major stat Unseld had the advantage in was assists, but even that wasn't a huge deal, as Unseld was only third on the team in assists over that series. Unseld probably wasn't even the second most deserving player in the finals, as the Bullets small forward Bobby Dandridge had a fantastic series of his own. For goodness sake, in games 2 and 3, Wes Unseld only scored 2 points, on incredibly poor shooting from the field, while Elvin Hayes basically carried the team on his back, putting up 25 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 blocks in Game 2, and then putting up 29 points, 20 rebounds, and 2 steals in Game 3. What makes the entire thing even weirder is that in the final seconds, as Game 7 was ending, the commentator for the CBS broadcast stated that Bobby Dandridge was the winner of the Finals MVP award. Yet when they returned from the commercial break, it was Wes Unseld who was being handed the MVP trophy. If something like this happened today, Twitter would absolutely explode, claiming that Elvin Hayes was straight up robbed of the award. People like me would be making constant videos about how this was the worst snub of my lifetime. And much of the basketball community would be speculating if there was some secret nefarious reason as to why the award was given to Unseld over Hayes. More often than not, it's offensive players who win the MVP awards and who get all of the attention. But make no mistake, the defensive end of the court deserves more credit, as it's literally half of the game. Today, I'm breaking down my list of the top 10 greatest defensive players in NBA history, and let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with these choices. Before I get into it, let me first explain how my list works. Although defensive accolades are important, they are not the only major factor, as they're given based on the media members voting, which I might not necessarily agree with. The defensive awards also have a lot to do with who they were up against, so obviously, if the competition was stronger, then it's harder to win the award on a yearly basis. And lastly, this list is a combination of peak defensive abilities and longevity. For example, a player like Mark Eaton was one of the greatest rim protectors in his prime, but he had a relatively shorter career. When you compare his 10 seasons of elite defense to Tim Duncan's 19, well then it's obvious who's making the list and who isn't. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 10, Michael Jordan. MJ is the only guard to make my list, which really tells you just how difficult it is for a perimeter defender to stand out amongst the crowd. MJ deserves the spot though, as he was an absolute menace to opposing guards. He was first team All-Defense a total of 9 times, which is tied for the most in NBA history. Among guards, he has the highest blocks per game average in NBA history, and he's currently 4th on the all-time list in total steals, regardless of the fact that he played fewer seasons than most of the players in the top 25. At his best, he won the Defensive Player of the Year in 1988, where he averaged 3.2 steals and 1.6 blocks, which made him first overall in steals per game and first among guards in blocks per game. Number 9. Ben Wallace. His longevity may have not been enough to get him in the top 5, but his peak was certainly enough to get him in the top 10. This 6'9" center/power forward was one of the strongest players to ever do it, and he was one of the few men who could actually do a decent job of containing a prime Shaquille O'Neal. His best years were on the suffocating Detroit Pistons of the mid-2000s, and it was during this stretch that he won the Defensive Player of the Year award 4 times in a span of 5 seasons. Regardless of the fact that he was relatively undersized as a center, he was still able to be a solid shot blocker, leading the league overall in the 2002 season. He was also solid at stripping the ball from the opponent, as he averaged 1.3 steals over the course of his career. In total, he made 6 All-Defense teams, which is actually the fewest of all eligible players on my list. And as I mentioned before, that was a product of his lack of elite longevity. But when he was at his best, there are very few defenders more intimidating than Wallace. Number 8. Scottie Pippen. Although Michael Jordan may have averaged slightly more steals and more blocks, there was no question that Pippen was the most smothering on-ball defender for their 6 championship runs. Somehow, Scottie never won the Defensive Player of the Year award, which was probably a product of there being so many all-time great defensive centers in his era, but Pippen was the runner-up to Dikembe Mutombo in 1995 and to Gary Payton in 1996. In the totality of his career, Pippen made 10 All-Defense teams, and 8 of those selections were first team, which ties him for the 5th most in NBA history. Within his complete body of work were some key moments where Pippen displayed his abilities, like when he took on the assignment of defending and containing Magic Johnson in the 1991 NBA Finals. Number 7. Tim Duncan. Just like Pippen, Duncan never won the Defensive Player of the Year award, as he never led the league in steals or blocks. And with Bruce Bowen on his team for some years, you could even argue that there were stretches where he wasn't even the best defensive player on his team. But for what Duncan lacked in peak performance, he made up for it with his insane longevity and consistency. For his career, Duncan earned a whopping total of 15 All-Defense Team selections in his 19 years of pro basketball. That's easily the most selections in NBA history. Many players enjoy being an elite defender in their 20s, but Duncan carried that tremendous impact into his late 30s, as his intelligence and rim protection was a pivotal aspect of their final championship run in 2014. Number 6. Kevin Garnett. Especially during his time in Minnesota, the big ticket was a nightmare for opposing teams, as he was always bringing the energy and intensity on defense. Like the legendary Hakeem Olajuwon, Garnett was usually among the league leaders in blocks and steals simultaneously. For many years, his elite defense appeared to go unnoticed, but in his first season as a member of the contending Boston Celtics, he was rewarded with the Defensive Player of the Year. In total, he made 12 All-Defense teams, which is tied for the 2nd most of all time, and 9 of those were first team, which is tied with Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and Gary Payton for the most of all time. Add in the fact that he shut the Lakers down in the paint during the 2008 championship run, and I'm very comfortable having Garnett just outside my top 5. Number 5. David Robinson. Well before the big fundamental was locking down the paint for San Antonio, the Admiral was doing it at a higher level. Over a 6-season stretch from 1990 to 1996, Robinson was averaging a monstrous 3.6 blocks per game. All-time great rim protectors like Tim Duncan and Dwight Howard never had a single season where they averaged that many blocks per game, and Robinson did it over a 6-year stretch. He was also regularly among the league leaders in steals per game, regardless of the fact that he played at the center position, and he got as high as 2.3 steals per game in 1992, which was 5th in the league overall. He was the Defensive Player of the Year in 1992, and he earned a total of 8 All-Defense teams. Due to his service in the US Navy, Robertson didn't debut in his rookie season until the age of 24, and if he had got an earlier start to his career like many players do, then he would likely have even more defensive accolades than he already does. Number 4. Wilt Chamberlain. He's most famous for his accomplishments on offense, but Wilt was arguably just as dominant on the defensive end of the court. Since blocks and steals were not officially tracked until 1973, it's basically impossible to accurately estimate his defensive numbers over the entirety of his career. With that being said, Wilt's blocks were unofficially tracked over a 112-game span, and he averaged a mind-blowing 8.8 blocks over that stretch. Obviously, blocked shots are difficult to compare across eras, considering numerous variables, like how the three-point line didn't exist yet. But regardless, that's still insanely impressive no matter how you slice it. There are many examples of Wilt controlling games defensively. Some may say that he should be in the number 1 spot, based on his insane numbers and reputation. But I would disagree, as Wilt also had a bit of a reputation for occasionally taking some nights off defensively. Nonetheless, I certainly believe he deserves a spot in the top 5. Number 3. Dennis Rodman. The Worm's case defensively is a bit more complicated than some people may realize. Statistically, he was nothing to marvel at, as he has never had a single season where he averaged at least 1 block or 1 steal. What he did well, though, was frustrate the offensive player with his smothering on-ball defense, and force him into either a bad shot or into passing the basketball. I also believe that Rodman had the most versatile defensive career of all time. At different points in history, he was assigned to guard the best player from every position on the court. In the 80s, he was asked to guard Magic Johnson at point guard, Michael Jordan at shooting guard, and Larry Bird at small forward. And then in the 90s, he was asked to guard Karl Malone at power forward and Shaquille O'Neal at center. And Rodman did more than an adequate job of all of those tasks. In his career, he made a total of 8 All-Defense teams, and he won the Defensive Player of the Year in back-to-back seasons as a member of the Bad Boy Pistons. Number 2. Hakeem Olajuwon. I've said it once, I'll say it again. The dream was an absolute nightmare on defense, as he had the length, athleticism, and intelligence to be one of the select few greatest defenders ever. Officially, he's the NBA's all-time leader in blocked shots, and second place isn't even close. On top of that, he's currently 10th on the NBA's all-time list in total steals, which is completely insane for a center. The closest center to Hakeem is David Robinson, who is 54 spots below him on the all-time list. Over his career, Hakeem made 9 all-defense teams, and he won the Defensive Player of the Year twice. It is worth mentioning that he finished in the top 3 of the Defensive Player of the Year voting a whopping 6 times. A couple things that are rarely appreciated about Hakeem was his chase down speed and his lateral quickness, which helped him block and contest many shots from speedy guards and wings. He was truly the standard of defensive excellence in the 1990s. Here is my list of honorable mentions. Feel free to pause the video for a longer look. Should any of these players have made it into the top 10? Let me know below. Number 1. Bill Russell. Back when Russell and the Celtics dominated the NBA, the Defensive Player of the Year did not exist yet, so because of this, they often gave him the MVP award instead. Russell was a relentless competitor, and with his Olympian level of athleticism, he established himself as arguably the greatest rim protector in the history of the game. Just like Wilt Chamberlain, who I mentioned earlier, Bill Russell's blocks and steals were never officially tracked, but that doesn't entirely mean that we couldn't gauge his defensive impact. In 11 out of his 13 seasons in the NBA, Russell led the league in defensive win shares. That's more than doubled second place, which is George Mikan and Tim Duncan with 5. The most Defensive Player of the Year awards by one player is a total of 4, which is an honor shared by Ben Wallace and Dikembe Mutombo. If that award had existed during Bill Russell's era, then he likely would have at least doubled that total. Bill Russell built a legacy for himself and won 11 championships with defense as his greatest skill set, in the same era that Wilt Chamberlain played in the NBA. If that isn't a strong case for being the greatest defender of all time, then I don't know what is.
Throughout the years, there have been many incredible defensive campaigns from some of the best players of league history, but for one reason or another, many of these campaigns didn't end with the Defensive Player of the Year award. Now before we get into the list, let me first establish my 2 rules of this list. Each player only has 1 spot on the list, so I will only rank a player's best season in which he did not win the Defensive Player of the Year award. This should give a nice variety to the list. The other rule is that only seasons where the award actually existed are eligible to make this list. So basically, starting with the year 1983. Also, these are the honorable mentions of the greatest non-DPOY seasons that didn't make the list. Let me know which one of these has the best case to get into the top 10. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 10, Dwight Howard in the 11-12 season. Between 2009 and 2011, Howard absolutely dominated this defensive accolade as he earned the trophy for 3 seasons straight, which no other player has ever done. By the time the 2012 season rolled around, voter fatigue may have been playing a part in Howard's vote total, as Tyson Chandler was that season's winner. Although Chandler was certainly deserving of the award, Dwight put up a strong campaign of his own, nearly becoming the first ever player to win 4 straight DPOY trophies. This season, Howard led the league in defensive rebounds and was 3rd in blocks per game, which was ahead of Tyson Chandler. He was also 3rd in defensive rating and 3rd in defensive win shares. On top of all of this, he was also selected to the NBA's first team All-Defense, compared to Chandler, who was only selected to the second team, which only makes things a little more awkward about the league's decision to give the award to Chandler over Howard. Number 9, LeBron James in the 12-13 season. If this list was about the biggest DPOY snubs ever, then this campaign from LeBron would certainly be in my top 5. But since it's just the greatest non-DPOY seasons overall, LeBron will have to settle for the 9th spot on my list. This is one of the more famous controversies as far as this award goes, since Marc Gasol was selected as the winner, yet he only made the 2nd All-Defense team, while LeBron made 1st team All-Defense. LeBron was the defensive anchor of his 66-16 Heat squad, and had the best defensive rating out of all players on his team. Number 8, Tree Rollins in the 82-83 season. The 7'1" Rollins is one of the great forgotten rim protectors of NBA history, and in the 1983 season, he was at his very best. The great perimeter defender Sidney Moncrief was awarded that season's award, but it easily could have gone to Rollins, who finished as a close second, as he put up 0.6 steals and a ridiculous league-leading 4.3 blocks per game. What's even more amazing is how Rollins did that in only 30.9 minutes per game. His per 36-minute stats puts his block shots at a whopping 5 per game. His middle-of-the-pack Atlanta Hawks was just barely better than half of the league defensively. But Rollins definitely did his part, as he finished 8th in defensive win shares, 2nd in defensive plus-minus, and 3rd overall in defensive rating. Number 7, Draymond Green in the 14-15 season. Kawhi Leonard was that season's winner, and the selection is remembered as one of the most controversial awards of NBA history, and for good reason, as Draymond was the defensive leader of the 67-15 Warriors' #1 ranked defense. He averaged a solid 1.6 steals and 1.3 blocks per game. But a lot of what Draymond does well defensively goes beyond the numbers, as he's an elite help defender, a fantastic on-ball defender, and one of the premier low-post defenders, despite usually being the undersized player. He was also 2nd overall in defensive win shares and 4th overall in defensive rating. Number 6, Tim Duncan in the 06-07 season. If there was ever a season where Tim Duncan should have won the Defensive Player of the Year award, this was it, as his San Antonio Spurs finished as the 2nd best defense in the entire league, and Duncan was the clear leader of that San Antonio unit, as he averaged 0.8 steals and 2.4 blocks. Marcus Camby was that season's Defensive Player of the Year, but despite that,
Duncan ranked ahead of him in terms of defensive win shares and defensive rating, as the big fundamental had the top spot in the league in each of those categories. Number 5. Mark Eaton in the 83-84 season. It was once again the elite defensive guard Sidney Moncrief who narrowly won the award. Now, the 1984 Jazz was just a middle-of-the-road team both overall and defensively, but their monstrous defender in the paint was the exception, and with his sheer size and with his 7'6" wingspan, the 7'4" center was putting up defensive numbers that modern bigs can only dream of. In only 26.1 minutes per game, Mark averaged 0.3 steals and 4.3 blocks per game, which translates to 5.9 blocks per 36 minutes. Despite a role player's amount of minutes, he easily led all players this season in blocks, blocks percentage, and defensive plus-minus. He would later go on to win 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards in his career, but very nearly started with his third this season. Number 4. Scottie Pippen in the 94-95 season. I debated whether to go with Scottie's 1996 campaign or this one in 1995, but ultimately this is the one I settled with. This season, not only did Scottie lead his Bulls in all 5 major stat categories, which only 5 players have ever done in league history, but he also led the NBA in steals with 2.9 per game, which was his career best. He also added 1.1 blocks per game, and his Bulls finished with the second best defense in the entire league. Scottie had the second most defensive win shares and third best defensive plus-minus, and had the best defensive rating in the entire league, even against competition like Dikembe Mutombo, David Robertson, Patrick Ewing, Dennis Rodman, and Hakeem Olajuwon. With his strong numbers, Dikembe Mutombo was that season's winner. Due to the quality of his rim protection, he may have been more deserving of the award. It's tough to say, but without question, this season from Scottie was one of the greatest that we've ever seen from a wing defender. Number 3. David Robinson in the 90-91 season. Dennis Rodman won the award over Robinson, which made the Admiral one of the greatest runner-ups of league history. But whether or not he should have been is another topic entirely, as he led his Spurs to a 55-27 record, and San Antonio had the best team defense in the entire league. As far as the stats advantage goes, Robinson absolutely crushed Rodman, with 1.5 steals and 3.9 blocks per game. Robinson also bested Rodman in defensive win shares, defensive plus-minus, defensive rating, and even in defensive rebounds. If you consider the fact that Robinson had won the Defensive Player of the Year award in his career, this runner-up season still might be the most impressive he ever was on the defensive end of the court. Number 2. Ben Wallace in the 03-04 season. The 2004 Pistons are arguably the greatest defensive team in NBA history, and the top defender of that group was none other than Ben Wallace. This season was sandwiched between the 2 Defensive Player of the Years before this season and his 2 Defensive Player of the Years after this season, which means that if he won the award this year, he would have won 5 straight Defensive Player of the Year awards. And if I'm being honest, I think he should have. The man formerly known as Ron Artest won the award this season, and that may have something to do with the fact that his Pacers had the league best 61-21 record. But by pretty much every defensive metric, Ben Wallace had a significant edge over Artest. Wallace averaged 1.8 steals and 3 blocks while having a better defensive rating, more win shares, and a better defensive plus-minus than Ron Artest. In fact, not only did Wallace have the most defensive win shares that season, but since the DPOY was introduced in 1983, Ben Wallace in 2004 had the most defensive win shares in NBA history. When it's all said and done, I still don't understand how he didn't win the award this season. Number 1. Hakeem Olajuwon in the 89-90 season. Once again, Dennis Rodman was the winner of the award this year, but to say that the runner-up had a strong case would be a massive understatement. This top spot was honestly an easy choice for me, as Hakeem dominated in basically every way you can defensively. His Rockets were the number 1 ranked defense as he put up 2.1 steals and an insane 4.6 blocks over the course of the year. In a season stacked with great defenders, Hakeem was first in defensive rebounds, first in block shots, first among centers in steals, first in defensive win shares, first in defensive plus-minus, and first in defensive rating. Second in the Defensive Player of the Year race. Go figure.
One of the most discussed topics on this channel is the underrated and underappreciated players of the NBA's past. When I'm asked who I think the most underrated players are, it's very difficult to answer because the truth is there's just so many of them. These are players who for one reason or another have been forgotten or overlooked as the years have gone on. Simply off the top of my head, I wrote down 35 players who had a chance at making this list, and then I narrowed those 35 down to only 10. Now, one crucial detail to note for my list: there are no active players on my list, and I believe there's a good reason for that. I've said this before in a previous video, but when we're talking about the most underrated players, there's usually one major factor that plays a part: ignorance. And I don't mean that to sound negative, but I mean that in the word's actual definition. It's easy for a player to be underappreciated when young fans literally know nothing about the player being discussed. Which is also why it's difficult for a modern player to be underrated to the same extent, because although that active player has his fans and his haters, by and large, everyone is familiar with his skill set and talent. Take a player like Damian Lillard for example. Everyone knows he's a legitimate superstar and is one of the best point guards in the entire league, but I also believe that he's building the perfect recipe to be one of the most underrated players of all time when we flash forward 20 to 30 years into the future. When people are reflecting on this current era 30 years from now, for the most part, they'll remember guys like Steph Curry, who won several championships and made a huge impact on the game of basketball with his three-point shooting. They'll also remember guys like Russell Westbrook, who was someone who broke records and completely transformed the way we look at the triple-double. But then there's guys like Damian Lillard, who never won any championships, never broke any significant records, and never immortalized himself in basketball history as a member of some sort of iconic super team. No, instead, he just faithfully and consistently produced superstar numbers for a small market in a less prestigious franchise. There's lots to be appreciated there, but decades later, those things aren't widely remembered and are rarely discussed, which naturally leads to that player becoming underrated over time. That's why there's such an old school flavor to this list, and if I'm still doing this YouTube thing 20 years from now, I'll be using the same explanation to tell you why there's more players from the 2020s than there are from the 2040s. So without further ado, let's get into it. First off, Sidney Moncrief. Sidney was a 6'3" point guard / shooting guard who spent the majority of his career with the Milwaukee Bucks throughout the 1980s. He was arguably the best defensive player during his prime, and he's the only guard to ever win the Defensive Player of the Year award multiple times. He was an incredibly gifted athlete and was a reliable and incredibly efficient scorer, especially by point guard standards, as he shot above 50% from the field over the course of his career, averaging as high as 22.5 points per game in 1983. This point is almost never mentioned, but Sidney's Bucks were actually the first team to ever eliminate Michael Jordan's Bulls from the playoffs, which they did in 1985. In that series, Sidney put up 26.5 points on 50-40-90 percentages while containing Jordan well below his usual efficiency standards. One of the major reasons why he's overlooked is due to the fact that he played in a stacked Eastern Conference throughout the 1980s, and although he's one of the greatest perimeter defenders to ever play, sadly, great defensive players aren't celebrated nearly to the extent that great offensive players are. Speaking of underappreciated defensive players, second up is Michael Cooper. You can't have an honest conversation about the Showtime Lakers of the 1980s without bringing up this man's impact. Although the 80s Lakers were an all-time great offensive team, they had a strong defensive presence as well, and Cooper was easily the best defender on that squad. He was incredibly tenacious with his on-ball defense, and was usually the player who was assigned to contain the opponent's best perimeter scorer. For his career, Cooper made an astonishing 8 all-defense teams, and his 1987 campaign was even better, as he was that season's Defensive Player of the Year. He was one of the original 3-and-D type of players, as he shot as high as 38.7% from three-point range, and was usually among the league leaders in three-point attempts. Third up is Moses Malone. I'll keep saying it because I feel pretty confident about it, but Moses Malone is the most underrated center of all time. I believe a major part of why he's so underrated is the fact that he's arguably the greatest journeyman to ever play, as Moses played for 8 different franchises throughout his basketball career. I mean, for goodness sake, look at how many different jerseys this guy wore over the course of his career. Due to this, no one specific franchise can claim him as their own, which certainly affects how he's remembered. Moses was simply dominant though, especially in terms of his scoring and rebounding. He was a 13-time All-Star, a 3-time league MVP, won 6 rebounding titles, and was the best player on the 1983 Philadelphia 76ers, a team that won the NBA championship and has a legitimate case for the title of the greatest team in NBA history. Moses' nickname was the chairman of the boards, and there are few players who have dominated a single aspect of pro basketball as much as Malone dominated the offensive boards. During the 1981-82 season, Moses averaged 6.9 offensive rebounds per game. No one else in the history of the NBA has ever officially averaged as many offensive rebounds as Moses did that season. That's a ton of second chance opportunities to consistently provide for your team. If you're still not thoroughly impressed, consider this. There are 8 players in NBA history with over 4,000 offensive rebounds. Robert Parrish is second all-time with 4,598. Moses has 6,731, and that doesn't even include his 2 seasons in the ABA. Honestly, it's laughable how much he dominates everyone else in that area. Next up is Bob McAdoo. When we talk about the NBA's 50 Greatest Players ceremony in 1997, people usually point to Dominique Wilkins as the biggest snub from that list. But I could give a strong argument that it was actually Bob McAdoo. During Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's individual dominance in the 1970s, McAdoo was one of the only players who legitimately challenged him as a regular MVP candidate, and he actually won the award over Kareem in 1975. McAdoo was a 6'9" center, but he played the game like a smooth small forward, as he scored the vast majority of his points outside of 10 feet with his stellar footwork and with his incredibly reliable jump shot. McAdoo led the league in scoring for 3 consecutive seasons from 1974 to 1976, getting as high as 34.5 in 1975. He did eventually win 2 NBA championships in his twilight years as a solid scoring spark off the bench for the Showtime Lakers in the 1980s. Fifth up is Chris Webber, one of the more recent legends on my list, but Webber absolutely has very good reasons to be here. When people talk about the great power forwards of the 2000s, they always talk about Tim Duncan, Dirk Nowitzki, and Kevin Garnett, as they should. But in the first half of the decade, Webber was legitimately in the conversation for the title of the best power forward in the game, and many people seem to have forgotten that. He was the best passer out of that group and was putting up monstrous stat lines during his prime, and if it wasn't for the league screwing him over in the 2002 West Finals, then he would be known today as an NBA champion and as the superstar who put an end to the Shaq and Kobe dynasty. Next is Mark Price. The 6-foot point guard played in the NBA from 1986 to 1998, and his best years were as a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Not only did he have an incredibly smooth handle, but Price was simply one of the best pure shooters the game has ever seen. His field goal percentage was just a bit shy of having 50-40-90 career percentages, which is absolutely incredible. Not only was he a near 20 points per game scorer in his best years, but he was also just slightly behind the league leaders in assists per game. I'm definitely planning on making his own video at some point, and considering his talent, it's quite surprising how overlooked he's become. Seventh on the list is Adrian Dantley. He played in the NBA from 1976 to 1991 and spent his best years as a member of the Utah Jazz and Detroit Pistons. Adrian was a smooth and fundamentally sound 6'5" small forward, whose mid-range game and ability to finish in the paint was consistently among the best of the best. He was a 6-time All-Star and a 2-time scoring champion. To simply say that Dantley was an underrated scorer would be a gigantic understatement. In 1981, he averaged 30.7 points. The following year, he averaged 30.3 points, and then 30.7 points in 1983, and then 30.6 points in 1984. That's a streak of 4 straight seasons where he averaged over 30 points per game. The only players who have a longer streak of seasons are Michael Jordan and Wilt Chamberlain. Those are literally the only 2 players. What's even more impressive is the fact that Dantley shot an insane 56.4% over that 4-season stretch. That's incredibly efficient, even for a center, but for a 30 points per game small forward, that's basically unheard of. Add that to the fact that he was consistently among the most efficient free throw shooters in the league, and yeah, Dantley is clearly underrated. Next up is Dolph Schayes. Many players are underrated and underappreciated. But few legends are so underappreciated that most young basketball fans have never even heard of them. That's the category that Shays falls into, as the legend played from 1949 to 1964, spending almost the entirety of his career with the Syracuse Nationals. The 6'8" power forward was a solid scorer, getting as high as 24.9 points per game, and was also an elite rebounder as he led the league in 1951 with 16.4 per game. Despite being a big man, he was also one of the best free throw shooters of league history, as he led the league on 3 separate occasions, getting as high as 90.4% from the charity stripe. He made 12 All-NBA teams and won the NBA championship in 1955, and he certainly would have been the Finals MVP if the award had existed at that point in history. Next is James Worthy. The 6'9" small forward is one of the most overlooked greats of basketball history, and was the perfect running mate for Magic Johnson. James loved to run the floor and score in transition, and was the most frequent beneficiary of Magic's no-look passes. That wasn't the only way he scored his points though. James was great with his back to the basket and in face-up situations with the opponent, as he had one of the quickest first steps the game has ever seen. His unique ability to find his way to the paint led him to have an elite field goal efficiency. He also had the nickname Big Game James Worthy, which was very fitting considering the fact that he's one of the great big game performers of league history. Like when he was named the 1988 Finals MVP, which capped off his heroic performance in Game 7 against Detroit, where he dropped 36 points, 16 rebounds, and 10 assists on 68% shooting. The Lakers needed every single one of those statistics to win that deciding game by just 3 points. It always annoys me whenever people refer to Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as one of the best duos of league history, because the truth is, they weren't simply just a duo. They were a superstar trio, with James Worthy being the third head on the Showtime Lakers' three-headed monster. Lastly is the late great Elgin Baylor. I've saved this guy for last because in my opinion, he's the most underrated player in NBA history. Kobe Bryant put it this way: Elgin Baylor was the Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan and the Julius Erving before Julius Erving. When he wasn't busy serving in the military, he was serving up his opponents, dropping 38.3 points per game in 1962. He also has the all-time record for the most points ever scored in an NBA Finals game when he dropped 61 points against Bill Russell and the Celtics in 1962. Just for good measure, he also snagged 22 rebounds that same game. It's one thing to score like that, but to rebound like Rodman at the same time is mind-boggling. Baylor also has the highest career rebounds per game average for anyone who didn't play at center, with an incredible 13.5 per game. Not only was he not a center, but he stood at only 6 foot 5 inches tall, which makes it even more impressive. No player his size or smaller ever had an average as high as 9 rebounds per game, and Baylor got 13.5. If you ask me, the Laker connection is actually the reason why he's so underrated. Because not only is he so overshadowed by all the other Laker greats, but he's easily the greatest Laker legend to never win an NBA championship. At least in technicality, since he was a member of the 1972 Lakers, but he only played in 9 games that season before his bad knees resulted in him retiring. Now before I get into the meat of my list, let me first explain how my list works. Just like the MVP award, only the regular season performances are factored in, meaning that what these players did or didn't do in the postseason will not ultimately affect their rankings on the list. Here's something else to remember. Although individual accomplishments and statistics will be factored in, it's also not the only major factor I'm considering. How the team improved after the addition of the rookie will be taken into account as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 10, Elvin Hayes. Interestingly enough, it was his teammate Wes Unseld who became one of the few players in NBA history to win the MVP award as a rookie. With that being said, I consider the Big E's rookie season to be even more impressive. As a member of the San Diego Rockets, the rookie Hayes improved his team by 22 wins over the previous season, and during which he put up averages of 28.4 points, 17.1 rebounds, and 1.4 assists on 44.7% shooting. Despite the fact that it was his debut season, he was that year's scoring leader, and he was 6th overall in rebounds per game.
Thanks to his immediate impact, he changed the Rockets from the literal worst team in the league to a playoff team in just one season. This wasn't just an all-time great rookie season, but from an individual standpoint, it was arguably the best season of Elvin Hayes' career. Number 9. Walt Bellamy. Unjustifiably, he's often indirectly referred to as one of the plumbers of the Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell era. But in reality, he's one of the great centers of basketball history. As a member of the Chicago Packers, Bellamy immediately took the leading role for his team, while putting up monstrous averages of 31.6 points, 19 rebounds, and 2.7 assists on 51.9% shooting. As only a rookie, he was second overall in scoring, third overall in rebounding, and he was the best in the league in field goal percentage. Now you could argue that these were empty stats on a bad team, and that isn't the worst argument considering how his Packers had the worst record in the league at only 18-62. With that being said, Chicago was an expansion team this year, and historically, in a team's first season of existence, it's usually a rough beginning regardless. Even with a losing season, Bellamy certainly deserves a spot on this list. Number 8. Tim Duncan. As one of the most consistent superstars in NBA history, it comes as no surprise that Duncan's career got off to a great start as well, as he immediately established himself as one of the best big men in the entire league. The 97-98 San Antonio Spurs had the second greatest turnaround in NBA history, finishing with 36 more wins than the previous season, and obviously Tim Duncan was a major reason for that. It would be misleading to act like he was the only reason, as the other great big man, David Robinson, suffered a major injury in the previous season, which resulted in him playing in only 6 regular season games. Regardless, Duncan's immediate impact was felt, as he averaged 21.1 points, 11.9 rebounds, 2.7 assists, and 2.5 blocks, on a career-best 54.9% shooting from the field. Along with that, Duncan played all 82 games in his debut season, providing a stable force of consistency on both ends of the court. Number 7. Shaquille O'Neal. The Diesel didn't waste any time before dominating the position. He wasn't completely the Shaq we would eventually come to know, as he was a slimmer and quicker version of himself, with strength and athleticism similar to that of a prime Giannis. As a punishing force, Shaq improved the Magic's record by 20 wins over the previous season, and he filled up the stat sheet in the process. On the year, he put up numbers of 23.4 points, a career-best 13.9 rebounds, 1.9 assists, and a career-best 3.5 blocks on 56.2% shooting. He was 8th in the league in scoring, 2nd overall in rebounding, and 2nd overall in blocks per game. Shaq was entering an NBA jam-packed with incredible veteran centers, yet he was immediately outproducing the vast majority of them in a variety of ways, which in turn solidifies his ranking on my list. Number 6. David Robinson. Since Robinson served in the Naval Academy before his NBA debut, he was actually a much older rookie relatively, starting out at the age of 24. With that being said, he certainly looked like a man amongst boys on most nights, as he was an absolute force on both ends of the court. He played all 82 games that season, and he posted averages of 24.3 points, 12 rebounds, 1.7 steals, and 3.9 blocks on 53.1% shooting. Immediately, the basketball world could see that Robinson was on his way to becoming one of the greatest defensive players of all time, as his 3.9 blocks per game is still the second highest average by a rookie in NBA history. He helped improve San Antonio by 35 wins over the previous season, quickly establishing themselves as a contender in the Western Conference. No matter how you look at it, Robinson was a beast as an NBA rookie. Number 5. Michael Jordan. MJ's once-in-a-lifetime greatness could be seen basically as soon as he set foot on the court for the first time. He took the league by storm, displaying his elite athleticism as he averaged 28.2 points, 6.5 rebounds, 5.9 assists, and 2.4 steals on 51.5% shooting. League-wide, he finished third in scoring and fourth in steals. But for the Bulls specifically, his value was off the charts, as he led his team in points, rebounds, assists, and steals. He's the only rookie in history who's ever done that. With Jordan at the wheel, the Bulls improved 11 wins over the previous season, and even Larry Bird said that he's never seen a player improve a team more than MJ did. It may not have been the greatest season of his career, but it didn't need to be in order to be one of the greatest rookie campaigns of all time. Number 4. Larry Bird. If anyone ever questions Larry Bird's winning impact, well then they don't have to look any further than his rookie year. When Bird was drafted, the Celtics were coming off of a season where they had the second worst record in the entire league. With Bird being the only major acquisition in the offseason, he improved the Celtics by 32 wins, taking them from one of the bottom spots in the league to the best record in the NBA. On the year, Bird put up 21.3 points, 10.4 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 1.7 steals on 47.4% shooting. He also shot 40.3% from three-point range, which was the third best efficiency in the entire league. He also led the Celtics in points, rebounds, and steals while playing all 82 games that season. At the end of the day, there are very few players who have started stronger than Larry Legend did. Number 3. Oscar Robertson. The Big O is known for his all-around offensive impact and for his triple-double average in the prime of his career. But what few people know is that he was roughly putting up these same numbers instantly upon his arrival in the league. As a 22-year-old, Oscar put up insane averages of 30.5 points, 10.1 rebounds, and 9.7 assists on 47.3% shooting. Very, very few players have led the league in points and assists in the same season, but Oscar is the lone player to do it in his rookie season. He was also extremely efficient while doing it, as he finished 4th overall in field goal percentage, and he was 9th overall in free throw percentage. Thanks to this jaw-dropping production, he led all players that season in offensive win shares, as his Royals improved by 14 wins over the previous season. If a rookie did this in the modern NBA, social media would absolutely explode, and everyone would be calling him the greatest player of all time. In reality, it was just another great season in a career's worth of great seasons from Oscar Robertson. Number 2. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. At the time, this incredible center was known by the name Lou Alcindor, but out of respect, I'll refer to him as Kareem. In his first season, he played all 82 games, and he was immediately an unstoppable force on offense, as the rest of the league quickly discovered that they had no answers for the skyhook shot. On the season, Kareem averaged 28.8 points, 14.5 rebounds, and 4.1 assists on 51.8% shooting. It's also safe to assume that he was an elite shot blocker at that time, considering how he averaged 3.5 blocks in the 7 seasons after they started tracking the statistic. Kareem wasn't just a great stat sheet stuffer, but he was lighter fluid for the Milwaukee Bucks franchise, as he made them instant contenders in the Eastern Conference, improving the team by 29 wins over the previous season. He even finished 3rd overall in the MVP race, as he was already establishing himself as the best center in the NBA. Here is my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made it into the top 10? Let me know in the comments below. Number 1. Wilt Chamberlain. This top selection should really come as no surprise, as Wilt's debut shook the basketball world, while making people reevaluate what they thought was possible. The Big Dipper immediately dominated the game like no rookie has before or since, as he put up averages of 37.6 points, 27 rebounds, and 2.3 assists on 46.1% shooting. In the history of the game, no other player has averaged over 37 points per game over the course of a season. Also, no other player has averaged 27 rebounds per game over the course of a season. Wilt did both of these things in the same season as a rookie. If that doesn't blow your mind, then you're not truly grasping it. Wilt also led the league in most major advanced stats, like win shares and player efficiency rating. He improved his Philadelphia Warriors by 17 wins over the previous season, and he was rewarded with that season's MVP, and the voting results were not even close. This is the ultimate bar for a rookie season, and I assume that it will stay that way for a very, very long time. Usually, when a young NBA player makes a strong impression and performs at an all-star level, that player typically only continues his ascension and progression, proceeding to have a long and productive career. Unfortunately though, this isn't always the case. Today, we're looking at the top 10 greatest one-hit wonders in NBA history, which are players who had one season where they appeared to be on their way to superstardom just to quickly fizzle out. And let me know in the comments how your list differs from mine. Number 10, Michael Carter Williams. Michael was a 6'5" point guard who was selected by the Philadelphia 76ers with the 11th overall pick in the 2013 draft. Immediately, once his NBA rookie season began, the hype train officially took off for this kid. In his debut game, he stunned the basketball world by dropping 22 points, 12 assists, 7 rebounds, and 9 steals, in a close victory over the defending champion Miami Heat. Less than a week later, he had 26 points and 10 assists in a victory over the Chicago Bulls. In his very first week in the NBA, he was honored as the league's Player of the Week. At the end of the regular season, he had recorded averages of 16.7 points, 6.2 rebounds, 6.3 assists, and 1.9 steals on 40.5% shooting. Only 4 players in NBA history have averaged at least 16 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists in their rookie season, and those players are Magic Johnson, Oscar Robertson, Luka Doncic, and Michael Carter Williams. As a reward for his debut season, Michael was given the NBA's Rookie of the Year, but unfortunately, it's all been downhill from there. He had shoulder surgery in the offseason, and it was clear that he had lost a significant step in his game. Within a few years, he was no longer a starter in the NBA, and was only averaging single-digit points. At the time I'm making this video, he's looking for a roster spot as a free agent. Number 9, Jahlil Okafor. This 6'10" center was taken with the 3rd overall pick by the Philadelphia 76ers in the 2015 draft. And it was the 3rd straight year that the 76ers used a top 6 pick on a center, which were Nerlens Noel, Joel Embiid, and Okafor. At least in 2016, it appeared as if Jahlil would end up being the best prospect out of all of them. In that rookie campaign, in 30 minutes per game, he averaged 17.5 points, 7 rebounds, and 1.2 blocks on 50.8% shooting. Although he wasn't a very intimidating rim protector, he certainly displayed a tremendous amount of skill on offense, and finished on the NBA's all-rookie team. It is worth mentioning that he only played 53 games in that rookie season, due to a meniscus tear in his right knee, which ended up being the beginning of his dramatic decline. The following season, he averaged far fewer points, rebounds, and blocks. Throughout his short career, he would continue to deal with injuries while being traded from team to team, and by the age of just 25, he had played his final game in the NBA. Number 8, Michael Adams. Now don't get the wrong impression about this ranking. Unlike other players, Adams had a 7-year stretch where he was a productive player in the league. But for 1 year specifically, he appeared to be an absolute superstar. In the 1990-91 season, he was in the right opportunity to succeed on the Denver Nuggets, as he averaged 26.5 points, 10.5 assists, 3.9 rebounds, and 2.2 steals on 39.4% shooting. This made him 6th overall in scoring and 3rd overall in assists. Although this 5'10" point guard was certainly a talented player, it appeared his superstar season was a bit of a fluke, as it was sandwiched between 2 more down-to-earth seasons. Ultimately, he still had the skills to be remembered, but if he was always as good as his peak season, then he would have been in the conversation for the title of the greatest player under 6 feet. Number 7, Antoine Carr. This 6'9" power forward was a bit of a journeyman throughout his NBA career, and for his first 6 seasons in the league, he put up rather underwhelming numbers, averaging about 8 points and 3 rebounds. And then in his late 20s, he was acquired by a desperate Sacramento Kings team, and suddenly he found lightning in a bottle. In the 90-91 season, Carr was the Kings' leading scorer, as he averaged 20.1 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 1.3 blocks on 51.1% shooting. The Kings only won 25 games that year, and apparently Sacramento's management figured that this was a fluke season from Carr. So they traded him while his value was high to the San Antonio Spurs, and it ended up being a brilliant move. His decline was as quick as his initial ascension, as he wasn't close to replicating that level of production for the Spurs. And although he went on to have a long NBA career, he never again flirted with the possibility of making an all-star team. Number 6. Mike James. This 6'2" point guard was the very definition of a journeyman, as he switched teams a total of 13 times in his 12-year NBA career. Throughout the vast majority of his career, he had a very modest contribution, and served mostly as a solid 3-point shooting role player on most teams. But specifically in the 05-06 season, James took more of a leadership role, and appeared as if he was trying to establish himself as a star. He was the Raptors' second leading scorer behind Chris Bosh, and he also led the team in assists as he averaged 20.3 points, 5.8 assists, and 3.3 rebounds on 46.9% shooting. That production was certainly needed on a bad Raptors team, as that was his only season where he started in every game that he played. But after his trade to the Minnesota Timberwolves, it was all downhill from there. Number 5. Aaron Brooks. Not much was expected of Brooks upon entering the league, as he was selected with the 26th overall pick by the Houston Rockets in 2007. He wasn't really wowing anyone in his first couple seasons in Houston, as he averaged nearly 9 points and a couple assists. But it was his third season where he took a massive step forward, as he played and started in all 82 games, while putting up 19.6 points, 5.3 assists, and 2.6 rebounds on 43.2% shooting. Thanks to this effort, he won the NBA's Most Improved Player. That Rockets team didn't have a healthy superstar on its roster, which allowed Brooks to display some of his own capabilities. But for one reason or another, it was a level of play that he didn't sustain in the following seasons. And to close out his career, he was traded from franchise to franchise before he was out of the league at the age of 33. Number 4. Tyreke Evans. I vividly remember the beginning of this man's career, and the hype about his game. He was a 6'6" shooting guard who was taken with the 4th overall pick in the 2009 draft by the Sacramento Kings. Immediately upon entering the league, his skills were evident, as he had a terrific handle on the basketball and a solid pull-up jumper. Even as a 20-year-old rookie, he was quickly establishing himself as one of the most clutch players in the league. On the year, he put up averages of 20.1 points, 5.8 assists, 5.3 rebounds, and 1.5 steals on 45.8% shooting. Thanks to this effort, he was honored as the NBA's Rookie of the Year, finishing ahead of Steph Curry, James Harden, and DeMar DeRozan. Based on his skills and production, many people assumed, including yours truly, that he was on his way to being one of the best players in the league. But unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case, as his rookie season ended up being the best year of his career. What's odd is that Tyreke didn't really have any major injuries as an excuse. Whether it was his lack of conditioning, discipline, or confidence, he never improved his game after his debut year, and before he reached the age of 30, he had played his final game in the NBA. Number 3. Dana Barros. For some reason, the 76ers have a lot of one-hit wonders in their history. Dana was a 5'11" point guard who had a very underwhelming start to his career, as he averaged less than 10 points over the course of his first 5 seasons. But after some changes in the coaching staff and approach, he suddenly had a breakout season in 94-95 at the age of 27. Barros led his team in scoring, assists, and steals, with numbers of 20.6 points, 7.5 assists, 3.3 rebounds, and 1.8 steals. on 49% shooting from the field. He was also lethal from downtown, as he shot a remarkable 46.4% from three-point range on 5.2 attempts per game. Thanks to this season-long performance, he made his first and only All-Star appearance, and was voted as the most improved player. At the end of the year, he left the 76ers in free agency to play for his hometown team, the Boston Celtics. But in hindsight, that may have not been the best decision, as he was reduced to a bench role and couldn't replicate his previous success from his 76ers days, and would never return to his All-Star form. Number 2. Walt Hazzard. I've never seen Walt on any other one-hit wonders list, which kind of blows my mind considering how I'm ranking him as high as second place on my list. He was a 6'2" point guard / shooting guard who initially was drafted by the Lakers, but only put up moderate numbers in his time in Los Angeles. After he joined the Seattle Supersonics for the 67-68 season, he had one of the most randomly elite seasons in NBA history. He had one of the most ugly jumpers that I've ever seen, but it did work for him as he led his team in scoring and assists, putting up 24 points, 6.2 assists, and 4.2 rebounds on 44.1% shooting. In just one season of rapid progression, he convinced the basketball world that he was one of the best players in the game. But apparently, the Sonics management knew better, as they traded Hazzard when his value was at its highest, for the NBA Hall of Famer Lenny Wilkens. Lenny then continued to be a perennial all-star for the Sonics, while Hazzard became a major disappointment in Atlanta, and would never return to his peak form, making it one of the most lopsided trades in NBA history. Here's my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these have made it into the top 10? Let me know below. Number 1. Jeremy Lin. This 6'3" point guard entered the NBA undrafted, so his expectations were not very high on his numerous short-term contracts. After a very weak and sporadic rookie season with Golden State, Lin got another opportunity with the New York Knicks, and this one he didn't squander. It was one of the most random ascensions to stardom that the league has ever seen, as Lin was taking the NBA by storm, earning the nickname Linsanity in the process. After scoring a grand total of 32 points in his first 9 games in New York, Lin then exploded, averaging 25 points, 9.2 assists, and 2.2 steals over a 9-game stretch. He was taking over fourth quarters, he was hitting game winners, and he even dropped 38 points on Kobe Bryant and the Lakers. People were convinced that they were witnessing the birth of a superstar, but in reality, most of the basketball community got caught up in a short-lived spectacle, with substance that wasn't built to last. After Carmelo Anthony returned from injury, Lin took a back seat from much of the scoring and ball dominating. At the end of the season, Lin was acquired by the Houston Rockets, but without the point guard advantages of having Mike D'Antoni as a head coach, Jeremy Lin could never replicate the short and amazing success he had in New York. In all my years of following the NBA, I've never seen someone rise and fall as quickly as Jeremy Lin did in the span of just a few weeks. Before I get into the list, let me first explain the factors that determined my rankings. First off, the player had to win the game, so naturally, games like Michael Jordan's 63 points in Boston Garden will not be considered for this list. Second, I'm factoring in the overall production of the performance, so statistics will matter heavily. Third, I'm considering the gravity of the moment. For example, performances that took place in the first round will be considered for this list. But obviously, a player will receive extra credit if that performance came in the NBA Finals. In a similar fashion, each game within a series will be considered, but obviously, a must-win Game 7 performance will earn extra credit. Lastly, how clutch the player was down the stretch will also count towards his ranking. All of these factors are subject to scale, and not every single one of these factors have to be present for each game on the list, but each one of these categories is capable of boosting a game's ranking. So now that we understand the logistics, let's get into my list, and let me know afterwards if your list differs from mine. Number 10. Bob Pettit in Game 6 of the 1958 NBA Finals versus Boston. The Celtics legend Bill Russell won 11 championships over the course of his career as a player, but in total, he made 12 trips to the NBA Finals. The only time Russell lost on the game's biggest stage was in 1958, and it was thanks to the historic showing from the Hawks power forward Bob Pettit. He's one of the more underrated and overlooked legends of basketball history, and on this night in 1958, he outshined Russell and everyone else on the court, as he put up monstrous totals of 50 points and 19 rebounds on 55.9% shooting. Every single one of those 50 points were needed, as his St. Louis Hawks won the championship-clinching 6th game by a score of 110 to 109. It took everything for him to defeat the greatest winner that basketball has ever seen, and for this reason, he gets to be the one starting off my top 10 list. Number 9. Tim Duncan in Game 6 of the 2003 NBA Finals versus the Nets. The big fundamental was an absolute beast throughout the entirety of this series, but in this game especially, he destroyed the New Jersey Nets in just about every way he could. Duncan nearly had the first and only quadruple-double of NBA Finals history, as he put up an insane stat line of 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks on 47.4% shooting. Despite being loaded with talent, the New Jersey Nets were only able to score a total of 77 points that evening, and that was mostly due to Duncan shutting down the paint and securing almost every rebound up for grabs. San Antonio was actually trailing by 6 points heading into the fourth quarter, but Duncan came up clutch, putting the clamps on the Nets' offense, which ultimately resulted in an 11-point championship victory for the Spurs. It was certainly one of the greatest performances by one of the greatest players to ever live. Number 8. Michael Jordan in Game 4 of the 1993 Finals versus the Suns. It was a crucial game for the Phoenix Suns, as they were looking to steal a game in Chicago and tie the series at 2 games apiece. Well, Jordan had other ideas, as MJ absolutely erupted for one of the highest scoring playoff performances of NBA history, regardless of the fact that he was being guarded by an all-defender, Dan Marley. In this iconic showing, Jordan dropped a whopping 55 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists on a lethal 56.8% shooting. Even with Jordan's insane level of production, the game was extremely close heading into the final few minutes, which is when MJ did what MJ does, as he sealed the game with some clutch baskets down the stretch. If MJ doesn't have the highest scoring finals average in NBA history, then the Phoenix Suns likely win this championship. But thanks to MJ's explosion, in this game especially, that didn't happen. Number 7. Giannis in Game 6 of the 2021 Finals versus the Phoenix Suns. This was recent history, so I'm sure you all know the performance very well. In a championship-clinching game, Giannis destroyed every defender Phoenix threw at him, and he was extremely efficient while doing it. On the night, the Greek Freak scored 50 points, 14 rebounds, 2 assists, and 5 blocks on a remarkable true shooting percentage of 74.9%. He was an absolute force on both ends of the court, as the Suns had basically no answer for him on either end. The game was actually tied heading into the fourth quarter, but Giannis took over as he scored 13 points in the final 10 minutes, sealing his first championship of his young career. Number 6. Elgin Baylor in Game 5 of the 1962 NBA Finals versus the Celtics. Heading into this crucial 5th game in the finals, the Boston Celtics had won the last 3 championships straight, and the series was tied at 2 games apiece. If the Lakers were going to win this important game in Boston, it was going to take a legendary performance from one of their star players. Well, to say that Elgin Baylor had a legendary performance would be an understatement, as the man recorded the highest scoring finals game in NBA history. On the evening, Baylor exploded for 61 points and a dominant 22 rebounds on 47.8% shooting. He achieved this absurd total against that season's #1 ranked defense. Thanks to his efforts, Los Angeles was able to win that pivotal 5th game with a final score of 126 to 121. Number 5. LeBron James in Game 6 of the 2012 East Finals versus the Celtics. This was the year following LeBron's epic meltdown in the 2011 Finals, as his Heat lost to the Dallas Mavericks. So when the Heat were yet again facing elimination, down 3-2 in the series, very few expected James to come up clutch and have a vindictive performance for the ages. But that's exactly what he did, as the King controlled the game in almost every aspect. In nearly 45 minutes of play, he poured in 45 points, 15 rebounds, and 5 assists on a stunningly efficient 73.1% from the field. Unlike most of the other games on this list, this game wasn't close down the stretch, as LeBron scored 41 of his 45 points in the first 3 quarters, keeping Boston from ever believing they had a chance at winning that contest. Needless to say, this was the beginning of LeBron proving that he could put the Dallas series behind him and that he was more than capable of winning an NBA championship. Number 4. Michael Jordan in Game 6 of the 1998 Finals versus the Jazz. Although this is far from Jordan's best playoff game statistically, the gravity of the situation and his clutch demonstrations don't really get any better than this. On top of that, Jordan was dealing with massive obstacles. For one, Scottie Pippen's back injuries were flaring up, causing him to miss much of the game. And for the portions that Scottie actually played, he was operating as more of a decoy than anything else. Due to this, it was a requirement for Jordan to carry the offense. Not only did MJ do just that, but he did it more than anyone ever has in NBA playoff history. MJ scored 45 points, had 1 assist, and 4 steals on 42.9% shooting. Capping off his evening was arguably the most clutch sequence of all time, as Jordan stole the ball from Karl Malone and proceeded to hit a game-winning shot with 5.2 seconds remaining, which was his final shot of his career with the Bulls, and the shot that earned him his 6th championship ring. Michael scored more than half of the Bulls' total points that game, as he scored 45 of their 87 points. That's 51.7% of the team's offense. Since the NBA merger in 1976, this was the highest percentage of a team's offense in NBA Finals history. Jordan understood the magnitude of the moment, and he understood the assignment, and he delivered like only he can. Number 3. LeBron James in Game 5 of the 2007 East Finals versus the Pistons. LeBron James was only 22 years old at this point in his career, and his Cavaliers were going up against a highly favored Detroit Pistons team, who had championship experience and who had made it to the Eastern Conference Finals for the 5th straight season. The series was tied at 2 games apiece, and heading into Game 5 in Detroit, almost no one expected Cleveland to win, let alone watch a 22-year-old have one of the greatest playoff performances of all time. What LeBron proceeded to do was possibly the greatest carry job in NBA history. With 3 minutes left in the 4th quarter, LeBron completely took over the game, as he scored the Cavaliers' final 25 points of the contest. From the 2-minute and 48-second mark in the 4th quarter to the buzzer sounding in the second overtime, not a single Cavalier contributed to the final score other than LeBron James. He was 11 of 13 from the field in that stretch, and the rest of the Cavaliers were 0 of 6. Thanks to his legendary effort, the Cavs won the game, 109-107. He finished the night with 48 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists on 54.5% shooting. I kid you not, I was watching this game live when it took place, and this was the exact moment that I started to believe that LeBron was on his way to the GOAT conversation. Number 2. Bill Russell in Game 7 of the 1962 Finals versus the Lakers. Russell was the epitome of a clutch performer, as he played in 10 Game 7s throughout the course of his career, and he won each and every single one of them. This one, though, was certainly his best. Russell dominated on both ends of the court this night. Not only was he performing up to his usual form both defensively and on the boards, but he excelled far beyond his usual standards on the offensive end. On the night, Russell scored 30 points, snagged 40 rebounds, and had 4 assists on 44.4% shooting. To this day, his 40 rebounds in that 7th game is still the highest total in NBA Finals history. There was one other area where Bill was extremely clutch, as he made 14 of his 17 free throw attempts, which is a conversion percentage of 82.4%. He was a career 56.1% free throw shooter. If Bill doesn't step up from the free throw line on this night, his Celtics would have lost the game. Instead, he heroically led Boston to their 4th straight championship, with a final score of 110-107. When it comes to getting it done when it mattered the most, nobody did it better than Bill Russell. These are my honorable mentions for this list, and let me tell you, it was very hard to contain this list just to 10. Feel free to pause the video for a longer look. Number 1. Magic Johnson in Game 6 of the 1980 NBA Finals versus the 76ers. This was Magic Johnson's rookie season, and although the basketball world saw his potential, he was far from being the Lakers' best player throughout the season, as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar securely held that title. The problem was that in Game 5 of the Finals against the 76ers, Kareem got injured, which didn't only take him out of the rest of the game, but it forced him to sit out of Game 6 as well. With their best player and their starting center out, the Lakers were forced to look at other options to fill the center spot. What they ultimately decided was to move their starting guard, Magic Johnson, to the center position, in place of Kareem. Magic was only a 20-year-old rookie at this point, and now suddenly, the weight of the basketball season is put upon his shoulders, as he starts at a position he had never played before in the NBA. Not only did Magic not fold under the pressure, but he delivered what I believe is the greatest performance in NBA playoff history. Although Magic started at center, they moved him all over the court throughout the night to fill whatever role was asked of him. He completed the game with an astonishing total of 42 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 steals on a deadly true shooting percentage of 72%. With this rookie's epic performance, Magic's Lakers won the game and secured the first of his 5 championships with a final score of 123-107. When it comes to a productive showing in a crucial game with the pressure at its highest, it really doesn't get any better than this magical performance.
A couple videos ago, I made a list of the top 10 greatest playoff performances in NBA history. The thing is, one of the rules of that video was that only games would count where the player actually won the game. Obviously, that leaves out many of the most impressive basketball playoff performances of all time, and several of you were disappointed to see losing performances left off the list. So with that being said, I'm doing my best to make up for it. So today, I've put together my list of the greatest performances in playoff history where the player lost the game. Make sense? Let's get into it. Number 10. Tracy McGrady in Game 2 of the 2003 first round against the Detroit Pistons. Between the years of 2003 to 2006, the Pistons were a historically great defensive team, setting numerous records for containing the opposing offense. With that being said, Tracy McGrady was in the prime of his career. He led that season in scoring, and he drug his talent-lacking Orlando Magic to the 8th seed of the East playoffs. After stealing Game 1 in Detroit, T-Mac was poised to take Game 2 as well. Unfortunately, the rest of the Orlando Magic were not. On this night, McGrady erupted, doing everything he could to keep his team in the game, as he scored 46 points and added 5 rebounds, on a remarkably efficient 61.5% shooting from the field. Ultimately, the Magic lost the game, 89-77. Despite the loss, it was one of the most impressive carry jobs of basketball history, as McGrady scored 46 of the Magic's 77 points. Although Detroit's all-time great defense could do nothing to slow down McGrady, as he made over 60% of his shots, they completely locked down the rest of his teammates, as they shot only 26.2% on the evening. The second leading scorer for the Magic was Andrew DeClercq with 9 points, and after him and McGrady, no other Magic player had more than 5 points. If you look up the word carry in the dictionary, you'll see a picture of this game. Number 9. John Stockton in Game 5 of the 1988 Western Conference Semifinals against the Los Angeles Lakers. Take a second. Imagine that you're considered as the greatest point guard of all time, and in a crucial 5th game, you drop 20 points and 13 assists. You gotta be feeling pretty good about yourself. Except for the fact that the point guard on the other side of the court outscores you and dishes out 11 more assists than you. That's how John Stockton outshined Magic this night. Stockton poured in 23 points, 24 assists, and 5 steals on 50% shooting. Despite the masterful effort, the Lakers managed to get the last laugh with a clutch game-winning jumper from Michael Cooper. Number 8. Kobe Bryant in Game 6 of the 2006 first round against the Phoenix Suns. With a victory, the Lakers would have improbably eliminated the highly favored Phoenix Suns, and the Mamba wasn't looking to squander the opportunity. Kobe exploded offensively, especially down the stretch, as the Mamba scored 36 of his 50 points after the start of the second half. He did everything in his power to keep Los Angeles from losing, as he was hitting clutch basket after clutch basket. And on the night as a whole, Kobe poured in a playoff career high 50 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 steals on 57.1% shooting. Ultimately, Steve Nash and the Phoenix Suns were just too much, but this game remains as Kobe's most impressive performance in playoff defeat. Number 7. Donovan Mitchell in Game 1 of the 2020 first round against the Denver Nuggets. The playoff bubble started off with a bang as Mitchell detonated on the highly favored Nuggets, achieving one of the highest scoring playoff games that the league has ever seen. What's amazing is that Mitchell started off slowly, scoring only 2 points in the first quarter, but after that, he basically couldn't be stopped from anywhere on the court. He finished the game with a monstrous 57 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists on 57.6% shooting from the field. He was also a perfect 13 of 13 from the free throw line. There's really not much to say about this game other than the fact that Mitchell was unconscious, but the offensive combo of Jokic and Murray proved to be too much down the stretch. Number 6. Isaiah Thomas in Game 6 of the 1988 NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers. This was easily one of the most heroic basketball performances that's rarely talked about. Heading into that 6th game in Los Angeles, the Pistons were up in the series 3-2, and with his first NBA championship within his grasp, Isaiah wasn't going to show up with anything other than his best effort. It was an extremely close game throughout the third quarter, and Isaiah was already pretty hot from the field. Unfortunately, with just over 4 minutes left in the third, Isaiah severely rolled his ankle when he stepped on Michael Cooper's foot during a fast break. Isaiah was forced to sit out for just a moment, but with 3 minutes and 45 seconds left in the third, Isaiah returned to the court. It appeared as if he took the injury personally, as he started attacking offensively to an even greater extent. He scored 11 more points in the final 3 minutes and 45 seconds of the quarter, with some baskets coming in a spectacular fashion, regardless of the pain in his swollen ankle. In the third quarter as a whole, Isaiah dropped 25 points, which to this very day is still the most points ever scored in one quarter of an NBA Finals game. On the night as a whole, Thomas dropped 43 points, 8 assists, and 3 steals on 56.3% shooting. At the end of the day, the Pistons barely lost the game, with a final score of 103-102. But honestly, it's debatable whether or not they should have lost, considering how the game ended with the extremely controversial phantom foul. Number 5. Damian Lillard in Game 5 of the 2021 first round against the Denver Nuggets. To say that Lillard was deadly efficient in this game would be an understatement, as he went on to display one of the greatest basketball performances of all time. The series was tied heading into the pivotal 5th game, and Lillard was determined to give his team a chance to win. On the night, Lillard dropped a whopping 55 points, 10 assists, 6 rebounds, and added 3 blocks on a ridiculous 70.8% shooting. Even more impressive than that, Lillard scored his 55 points on a true shooting percentage of 96.8%, which sounds like something that would only be possible in a video game. He also made extremely difficult game-tying threes at the end of regulation and at the end of overtime. He was unstoppable from the perimeter as he buried 12 three-pointers this game, which is still the most three-pointers made by a single player in an NBA playoff game. Ultimately, Portland still found a way to lose this game with a final score of 147-140. But regardless, this went down in the history books for Lillard for a multitude of reasons. Number 4. Hakeem Olajuwon in Game 6 of the 1987 Western Conference Semifinals against the Seattle Supersonics. The Houston Rockets were facing elimination against a very deep Sonics team, but on their side was a young and emerging Hakeem Olajuwon, who was ready to have the game of a lifetime. Olajuwon's presence and impact was felt everywhere on the court, as he controlled nearly every aspect of the game. On the night, Hakeem put up a jaw-dropping 49 points, 25 rebounds, 2 steals, and 6 blocks on a solid 57.6% shooting from the field. Those numbers are awfully reminiscent of the days Wilt Chamberlain played, but that was an era where both scoring and rebounding were even more inflated, which makes this playoff performance from Hakeem even more impressive. Despite his best efforts, the Dream just couldn't overcome the Sonics in double overtime. Although Hakeem locked down the paint, Seattle's perimeter scorers were having a feast, and due to this, the Sonics won the game and the series with a final score of 128-125. Number 3. Jerry West in Game 7 of the 1969 NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics. Only one time in NBA Finals history have they given the Finals MVP award to the player on the losing side, and it was this performance that convinced the voters to do it. The Celtics went on to win this game 108-106, but the Lakers' Wilt Chamberlain twisted his knee in the fourth quarter and had to be removed from the game, which put even more of the weight on Jerry West's shoulders to deliver down the stretch. With the healthy Chamberlain, the Lakers may have won this game. On top of that, West was dealing with his own significant injury, as he severely hurt his hamstring in Game 5 of the series. Regardless of the injury, West had a game for the ages, as he dropped 42 points, 13 rebounds, and 12 assists on 48.3% shooting. West and Jimmy Butler are the only players in NBA history to record a 40-point triple-double in the NBA Finals. Number 2. LeBron James in Game 1 of the 2018 NBA Finals against the Golden State Warriors. Hardly anyone expected the Cavs to have a chance at winning this first game, as the superstar-heavy Warriors had been dominating the league. The fact that LeBron and the Cavs were such heavy underdogs made this performance all the more surprising and spectacular. In this contest, LeBron felt more like a quarterback than anything else, as the Cavaliers' offense was ran almost exclusively through him. On the night, LeBron dropped a well-rounded 51 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists on an impressive 59.4% shooting. Stunningly, LeBron had his team in a position to win the game, but after a couple missed free throws by George Hill and a boneheaded play by J.R. Smith, things unraveled pretty quickly, as Golden State ended up winning the game in overtime 124-114. Here's the list of my honorable mentions. Feel free to pause the video for a longer look. Think any one of these performances should have made it into the top 10? Let me know in the comments section below. Number 1. Michael Jordan in Game 2 of the 1986 first round against the Boston Celtics. To this day, this is still the highest scoring performance in NBA playoff history, which makes it impressive in and of itself. But what makes it even more stunning is the fact that it came against that season's number 1 ranked defense and one of the greatest teams of all time, the '86 Boston Celtics. Despite being guarded by an NBA All-Defender in Dennis Johnson, MJ completely carried the Bulls' offense as he pushed this game into multiple overtimes. By the time the game was done, Jordan had recorded a total of 63 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, and 3 steals on 53.7% shooting. The overpowered Celtics ended up escaping the game with a final score of 135-131. But afterwards, even Larry Bird had to appreciate, as he described that he was God disguised as Michael Jordan. Number 7. Blazers and Lakers in the 2000 Western Conference Finals. At the time, many people believed that the winner of this game would be the eventual winner of the NBA Finals, as the Western Conference was significantly stronger than the East during this era. In a way, this game has become the symbolic representation of the beginning of the Shaq and Kobe dynasty, as the iconic lob between the two late in the game remains as one of the most iconic moments of basketball history. Unlike just about every other game on this list, this Game 7 wasn't all that close throughout, considering how Portland held a significant lead throughout most of the game, with the Lakers appearing a bit sluggish out of the gates. But inevitably, that was all set up for one of the greatest playoff comebacks of all time, as the Lakers found themselves down by 15 points early in the fourth quarter. As guys like Kobe, Shaq, and Brian Shaw started heating up, Los Angeles was locking down Portland defensively, as the Blazers went ice cold, missing 13 straight shot attempts during the heart of the fourth quarter. By the time Portland finally started to figure out their offense, it was too late, as the Lakers had all the momentum capped off with the iconic moment that put the game away. Number 6. Hawks and Celtics in the 1988 Eastern Conference Semifinals. This is easily one of the greatest solo duels that the league has ever seen, as Dominique Wilkins of the Atlanta Hawks was extremely hot, while Larry Legend refused to be denied down the stretch. To this day, this game is famously referred to as the duel. The human highlight film was basically unstoppable right from the opening tip-off, as he was efficiently hitting everything from the field, leading the offense for his team. Larry waited until the fourth quarter to really start heating up though, as both superstars continued to trade difficult baskets. Wilkins scored 16 points in the final quarter, but Bird proceeded to show his legendary clutch gene as well, as he scored 20 points in the fourth quarter alone on a remarkable 9 of 10 shooting from the field. The lead continued to go back and forth in the final minutes, and it all came down to one possession. Dominique had a chance to tie the game with a 3-point shot, but Danny Ainge wisely intentionally fouled Wilkins, forcing him to shoot 2 free throws instead. Wilkins made the first and then proceeded to miss the second on purpose, but the Hawks couldn't recover possession and the Celtics won the game 118-116. On the night, Wilkins dropped 47 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists, while his teammate Doc Rivers had 16 points and 18 assists. Larry Bird finished with 34 points, 6 assists, and 4 rebounds, as he added this epic performance to his already legendary resume. Number 5. Celtics and Lakers in the 2010 NBA Finals. If you don't like defensive slugfests, then you probably won't appreciate this game being on the list. During the Lakers and Celtics rivalry days of this era, physicality was always a defining aspect of these matches, and with that being the case, the refs basically put away their whistles for much of the 7th game, and let the players decide the outcome for themselves. Thanks to this mentality from the refs and players, Game 7 of the 2010 Finals may have been the most physical basketball game that I've ever seen since the turn of the millennium. Kobe Bryant famously shot only 6 of 24 from the field this night, but the thing is, almost everyone shot poorly, as Pau Gasol was 6 of 16, Ron Artest was 7 of 18, Paul Pierce was 5 of 15, and Ray Allen was only 3 of 14. Again, all of that translates to an extremely ugly, low-scoring game, but it was ugly in all the right ways, as the defense and brutality of the matchup took center stage. One of the key aspects of this physical game was the rebounding, and both Kobe and Gasol rose to the occasion, as the Mamba snagged 15 rebounds while Gasol got 18 of his own. In the final few minutes of this close battle, things got really exciting, as Kobe, Gasol, and Artest each made their own clutch shots down the stretch, while the Celtics made big shots of their own, doing everything they could to prevent the game from slipping away. In the final seconds, the Lakers got a much-needed stop, as they executed their revenge over their rivals, in what is the most recent chapter of the Lakers vs. Celtics rivalry. Number 4. Celtics and Lakers in the 1969 NBA Finals. At this point in history, the Lakers had been eliminated in the finals by the Celtics over and over again, but the Lakers had just acquired Wilt Chamberlain to play alongside of Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, so the players and organization finally believed they were the better team than Boston, and were poised to win a championship. The Lakers owner Jack Kent Cooke was so confident that his team would win that he ordered thousands of balloons to be hanging from the rafters, with a text "World Champion Lakers" printed onto them. When Game 7 began, it was anything but easy for Los Angeles. Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West both showed up with their best efforts, putting up monstrous stat lines for their teams. Unfortunately for LA, Chamberlain had to leave the game in the final few minutes due to his leg injury. Jerry West was then forced to take on more of the load offensively. As for the Celtics, not only was Bill Russell securing 21 rebounds, but the entire team had a well-rounded attack, as 3 of Russell's teammates, Havlicek, Bryant, and Jones, scored at least 20 points. The game was incredibly close and suspenseful down the stretch, and Jerry West proved why he was known as Mr. Clutch, as he dropped a 40-point triple-double in the deciding game. Ultimately, the Hall of Fame loaded Celtics were just too much, as they narrowly won the game 108-106. Jerry West might have been named the Finals MVP, but I don't think Russell minded, as he earned his 11th championship ring.
Number 3, the 76ers and Celtics in the 1981 Eastern Conference Finals. This was an epic matchup between the two best players in the Eastern Conference, Larry Bird and Julius Erving. At one point, the Celtics were down 3-1 in the series, yet they had stormed back to force a 7th game, as Larry Bird was determined to win his first championship ring. With a trip to the NBA Finals on the line, both of these extremely talented teams put forth their best efforts. In total, 7 Hall of Famers were competing in this fantastic game. Once again, this game was a prime example of referees putting away their whistles and letting the team settle the score for themselves. The game was fast-paced, but it was also quite intense from a physical standpoint. Neither team was lacking in the energy department, as the hustle plays were clearly on display from both sides. This game was also a block party, as a total of 16 shots were rejected on this evening, as no one was willing to give up any easy baskets. There were constant lead changes throughout the contest, and the energy in the building was some of the best playoff atmosphere that I've ever seen. Larry Bird was a beast defensively, and the Celtics needed a couple of clutch stops down the stretch. The game was tied at 89 with only a minute remaining, when Larry got a crucial stop on Darryl Dawkins. Bird then got the rebound and stormed down the court where he hit the game-winning basket, in what was one of the most clutch sequences in playoff history. On the night, Dr. J had 23 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 blocks, while Larry Bird got the win with 23 points, 11 rebounds, 5 assists, and 5 steals. Number 2, 76ers vs. Raptors in the 2019 Eastern Conference Semifinals. Although this game is remembered fondly for the iconic final shot, many people forget just how great this game was leading up to that moment. The shot making in the fourth quarter was insane, as both teams shot at least 50% in the quarter. No one was willing to go down without a fight, and in the final 8 minutes alone, there were 3 different ties and 4 different lead changes, as clutch performers like Jimmy Butler and Kawhi Leonard were providing some late-game heroics. In those last 12 minutes, Butler scored 10 points, while Kawhi poured in 15 of his own in that window. With only 4 seconds left in the game, Kawhi Leonard did his thing, hitting one of the most famous game winners in NBA history. To this day, it's the only game-winning buzzer beater in the 7th game of the playoffs. Quite the legendary way to end a legendary game. On the night, Leonard had 41 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals, leading his team down the road to an NBA championship. Before we look at the top spot, here is my long list of honorable mentions. Should any of these have made the top 7? Let me know below. Number 1, Cavaliers vs. Warriors in the 2016 NBA Finals. Was there ever really a question about which game would take the number 1 spot? As far as the magnitude of the moment, it really doesn't get any bigger than this. The Warriors and Cavaliers were in the middle of their rivalry, as the teams were in a finals rematch for the NBA championship. Along with that, Golden State was looking to finish off their 73-9 record-breaking season, and a victory likely would have earned them the title of the greatest team in NBA history. On the other hand, you had the Cleveland Cavaliers, who had come back from a 3-1 deficit, and with a victory, they would achieve the greatest upset in NBA Finals history. None of the prior 6 games in the series had been all that close, but obviously that wouldn't be the case for Game 7. The intensity was there throughout, as neither team wanted to be on the wrong side of history. From the beginning to the end, this contest was a complete nail-biter for both fan bases, as the game had a grand total of 20 separate lead changes. With about 1 minute remaining, the Cavs proceeded to have 2 of the most famous plays in basketball history. The first was the remarkable chase-down block by LeBron James, and the second was the clutch 3-point shot from Kyrie Irving to give the Cavaliers the lead. Ultimately, the Cavs held on to win this game with a final score of 93-89, as LeBron James became only the 3rd player to have a triple-double in a 7th game of the NBA Finals. There have been many blockbuster trades throughout the game's history, but what would have been some of the craziest ones never panned out for one reason or another. Today, we're looking at some of the most insane trades that almost happened. Number 10, Klay Thompson to the Timberwolves.
In 2014, the Warriors were seen as just short of being contenders, and Klay Thompson and Steph Curry were just on the verge of establishing themselves as superstars within the league. At this point, Kevin Love was already seen as a legit star for Minnesota, but the relationship between Love and the Wolves had grown cold. Negotiations were ongoing, but among the trade offers from Golden State included players like Draymond Green, Harrison Barnes, David Lee, and of course Klay Thompson. Jerry West was a consultant for the Warriors at the time, and he threatened to resign from the Warriors staff if the team decided to trade Thompson. At the time, most Warriors fans would have desired Kevin Love over Thompson, but after West's ultimatum, the Warriors decided to hold on to their sharpshooting talent, and the rest is history. Number 9. Chris Paul to the Lakers. Of all the near trades on this list, this one was the closest to actually materializing, as for about a 45-minute window, it seemed as if it was a foregone conclusion. The Lakers would have given up both Pau Gasol and Lamar Odom, but the pairing of Paul and Bryant would have certainly made them contenders in the Western Conference. Los Angeles also had Andrew Bynum on the roster before he was inevitably traded for Dwight Howard 1 year later. Whether it was a trio involving Bynum or Howard, it would have been tough for Los Angeles to have got by the San Antonio Spurs or the Miami Heat, but they at least would have had a chance. Due to the recent resurgence of super teams, small market owners were furious at the Lakers' acquisition of Paul and demanded that the commissioner David Stern block the trade. Stern did just that, and later released a statement saying it was for, quote, basketball reasons. In the end, this is only now remembered as one of the most frustrating days of Lakers history. Number 8. Scottie Pippen to the Supersonics. If you've seen The Last Dance, then you'll remember Scottie Pippen having an icy relationship with the Bulls general manager, Jerry Krause. Due to this, Pippen was constantly among trade discussions, and one of the times he was in the summer of 1994. It was shortly after Michael Jordan's first retirement, and the Bulls management was considering a full rebuild. At the time, the player in consideration was the Seattle Supersonics dynamic power forward Shawn Kemp. Later on, Kemp would have made for an interesting running mate for Jordan in Chicago, while the tandem of Scottie Pippen and Gary Payton would have made for one of the greatest perimeter defenses that the game has ever seen. Fortunately for Chicago fans, the Bulls ultimately decided not to deal their star small forward as Pippen went on to win his 4th, 5th, and 6th championship with Chicago. Number 7. Kevin Garnett to the Lakers. Ultimately, the trade partner ended up being Boston, where KG went on to win his lone championship and the league's Defensive Player of the Year. But before that, one of the near destination landings for the big ticket was in Los Angeles. Garnett had always been vocal about his desire to play with Kobe Bryant, and it nearly happened as the Lakers were offering a trade package that included both Andrew Bynum and Lamar Odom. In this case, it was the Timberwolves who decided against it, as they held out for a better deal, which in their mind ended up being the Celtics' offer in the summer of 2007. Would Garnett and Kobe have won championships together? With KG on the roster, it's unlikely that they ever make the Kwame Brown trade for Pau Gasol, so it's debatable whether or not that would have been a better thing for the Lakers in the long run, but at the very least, it makes for one intriguing what-if scenario. Number 6. Tracy McGrady to the 76ers. T-Mac's early years were famously spent with his fellow star, Vince Carter. The thing is, McGrady hadn't quite yet developed into the superstar that he would become in Orlando, so around the turn of the millennium, Toronto was prematurely evaluating their trade options. Before eventually settling on Orlando, McGrady was strongly being pursued by the Philadelphia 76ers. The main piece being offered was the shooting guard Larry Hughes. If the trade had materialized, it would have created a superstar tandem of Tracy McGrady and Allen Iverson, each as they were entering the prime of their careers. The two stars would have almost certainly dominated the Eastern Conference, considering how relatively weak the conference was in the early 2000s. Number 5. Charles Barkley to the Lakers. Turns out that a lot of the great what-if trades of basketball history involve the purple and gold, and in this case, it was for the all-time great power forward Charles Barkley. In 1992, the relationship between Barkley and the 76ers had soured, and although they eventually dealt Sir Charles to the Phoenix Suns, before that, he was nearly dealt to the Lakers. Reportedly, the package was Barkley and Ron Anderson for James Worthy and Eldon Campbell. It would have been just after Magic Johnson retired, but it also would have been just a few years before Shaq and Kobe were acquired. So it's no guarantee that the Lakers would have been contenders in the West. But at the very least, Charles was the league MVP the following season when he played in Phoenix. so he would have made them a viable threat until Shaquille O'Neal signed later on. Number 4. Steph Curry to the Milwaukee Bucks. In 2012, Steph Curry hadn't quite developed yet into the MVP superstar who would transform the league. In fact, he could barely stay on the court, as he was struggling through numerous ankle injuries. At the time, the Warriors were interested in acquiring the center Andrew Bogut from Milwaukee, and they did eventually get him in a trade, but one of the initial trade packages would have been involving Steph Curry. Obviously, a move like this would have had a tremendous effect on basketball history as we know it, as in this scenario, the Warriors franchise never becomes a dynasty. It's a large assumption to think that the Bucks would have simply drafted Giannis just a couple years later, when Curry almost certainly would have affected the draft position of the team. With that being said, considering how Milwaukee liked Giannis and picked him later in the first round, there's still a decent possibility that the tandem would have formulated. Number 3. Dirk Nowitzki and Steve Nash to the Raptors. Both were nearly traded together from the Dallas Mavericks to the Toronto Raptors. Both Dirk and Nash still had some things to prove as individual superstars, while Toronto's Vince Carter was at the height of his powers. The proposed trade was Dirk and Nash for Vince Carter and Antonio Davis. In hindsight, this is an obviously lopsided trade in favor of Toronto, but it didn't quite appear that way at the time, which is why Toronto's general manager was the one who ultimately declined the trade, opting to keep his superstar Vince Carter. Over the next several years, Dirk and Nash combined would each win numerous MVPs and an NBA championship, which left the Raptors organization feeling like they committed one of the more regrettable decisions of NBA history. Number 2. Kobe Bryant to the Chicago Bulls. In the summer of 2007, after back-to-back first-round exits to the Phoenix Suns, Kobe was extremely frustrated with the state of the Lakers, which is understandable since they had starters like Smush Parker, Luke Walton, and Kwame Brown. With a lack of a contender, which was promised to him when he signed a few years earlier, Kobe publicly demanded a trade elsewhere. Since Kobe had a no-trade clause, he gave the Lakers management a short list of teams that he was willing to go to, and among those teams was the Chicago Bulls. Reportedly, the Lakers and the Bulls had agreed to a deal, which would have sent Tyrese Thomas, Ben Gordon, Joakim Noah, and Luol Deng to Los Angeles for Kobe Bryant, but the Mamba ended up blocking the deal. The thing is, Kobe didn't want to go to a Chicago team that was devoid of talent, and in Kobe's own words, it would have been like going from one bad situation to another. Kobe said the only way he would approve a deal to Chicago is if Luol Deng was still there to play with him. Under these restrictions, the two teams were never able to make an agreement. Obviously, as a Lakers fan, I'm glad Kobe had a 20-year career with the Lakers, but it would have been at least interesting to see his career unfold in Chicago. He would have been playing in the shadow of the great Michael Jordan, and it would have been interesting to see if he could fill those shoes. It also would have put him in the same conference as LeBron James, where they would have inevitably had numerous battles in the NBA playoffs. Number 1. Michael Jordan and Clyde Drexler to the Houston Rockets. In my opinion, this is the greatest what-if trade of NBA history, and frankly, it's not even close. So let me first paint the picture. It's draft day 1984, and the Rockets have the first overall pick in the draft, followed by the Blazers with the second pick and the Bulls with the third pick. Obviously, in reality, we know how the draft went down. Hakeem Olajuwon was taken first by the Houston Rockets, Sam Bowie was taken second by the Blazers, which was a mistake to say the least, and Michael Jordan was taken third by Chicago. The thing is, there was a pre-selection trade in place which would have landed Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Clyde Drexler all as teammates on the Houston Rockets. So essentially, the Rockets already had Hakeem Olajuwon and the Hall of Famer Ralph Sampson on the roster. Both were superstar big men who were each capable of playing the center position. Due to this, some saw Houston's Ralph Sampson as an expendable asset. Portland was interested in acquiring their own star big man in an era that was dominated by players at the center position. So an offer was in place that would have sent the second overall pick and Clyde Drexler to the Houston Rockets for Ralph Sampson. Hakeem Olajuwon talked about this proposed offer in his book called Living the Dream, and he said that if the deal had gone through, the Rockets would have taken Hakeem with the first pick, Michael Jordan with the second pick, and obviously they would have had Clyde Drexler as well. Theoretically, this would have formed the scariest big three on paper that the league has ever seen. Believe it or not, it was actually Houston who declined the offer and decided to stick with their twin tower tandem of Hakeem and Sampson. It's not like Houston ended up being total failures for declining this offer, considering how they still went on to win multiple championships with Hakeem. But hypothetically, if they had Hakeem, Jordan, and Drexler all since 1984, how many championships could they have won? 8? 10? 12? Let me know your estimation.
There is one rule to success that everyone must know in the NBA. No one can do it alone. Usually it takes two, if not more. Today, I'm breaking down my list of the top 6 greatest duos in NBA history. And let me tell you, creating this list is hard. Sure, you may know who your top picks are, but ranking certain duos above others can simultaneously feel justified and blasphemous. I'm sure many of you will be triggered by my rankings and by my omissions, so let me know in the comments how you're much smarter and how your list differs from mine. Starting off at number 6, Larry Bird and Kevin McHale. These two are the biggest reason why the Boston Celtics dominated the Eastern Conference in the 1980s. What's truly special about this tandem is that you could argue that they're the two most all-around efficient scorers ever at their positions, as Bird had a 5-season stretch where he had 50-40-90 percentages, and Kevin McHale is one of the few players who shot 60% from the field and 80% from the free throw line in a season. These were their averages over their careers as teammates in Boston, and although they were elite offensively, they were also a problem defensively, as Bird made a total of 3 all-defense teams and McHale made a total of 6. This tandem won 3 NBA championships and 5 finals appearances, and although Robert Parrish also had a significant impact for their success, make no mistake that McHale was the second best player on that team during the peak of their success. Number 5, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. In reality, this duo won the fewest championships together out of any pairing in my top 6, but the dominating fashion of their winning was enough to earn their spot on the list. The initial collaboration of LeBron, Wade, and Chris Bosh had people referring to them as the Big Three Heat, but it didn't take very long for people to start treating them as a duo instead. Together, these stars made it to the NBA Finals in all 4 of their years as teammates in Miami, and they won the NBA championship in 2 of those instances. Easily, their most impressive run came in the 2012 to 2013 season, where they famously won 27 straight regular season games, which is still the second longest streak in NBA history. A very underrated aspect of their success was their solid defense, as the Heat were a top 5 team in their first 2 years with the Big Three, and the players who deserve the most credit for that is obviously LeBron and Wade. These were the averages of LeBron James and Dwayne Wade over that memorable 4-season stretch, and honestly, based on their talent, they could have been even higher up the list if they had been teammates for a longer period of time. Number 4, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. The fact that possibly the 2 greatest shooters in NBA history both play on the same team is pretty crazy. Obviously, their story is still being written, but even with plenty of basketball still ahead of them, they're securely on my list. As teammates, they've won 4 NBA championships, but just 1 Finals MVP, which does hold them back a bit on this list. These are the statistics of the 2 stars in their years as teammates, and although it's clear that Steph was always the better player, there's no question that Steph doesn't win his championships without Klay Thompson's two-way efforts, and without his clutch Game 6 performances. Although Steph Curry is best described as a decent defender, Klay, on the other hand, is the ultimate example of a 3-and-D player, as he has the 2019 All-Defense Team appearance to go along with his lethal 3-point shooting. I can imagine that with 4 championships, I'm gonna receive some criticism for not ranking these 2 higher. But when you consider that Kevin Durant was there for half of them, and they only have 1 Finals MVP between the 2 of them, you could certainly argue that there's a lot of other players who deserve a massive amount of credit outside of that tandem. Number 3, Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The instant Magic was drafted to the Lakers in 1979, he had the all-time great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as a teammate. Kareem's best seasons individually were with the Milwaukee Bucks in the 1970s, and since he was much older than Magic, the prime of their careers never completely overlapped. But they were both incredible and considered as elite players in the early 1980s. These were their career numbers as teammates in Los Angeles, as both greats were always offensive threats that had to be respected. As a dynamic and dominating tandem, they won 5 NBA championships together and 4 Finals MVPs between the two of them. One of the most beautiful aspects of their offensive attack is that Magic was their strength in transition, as he always loved to push the tempo, while Kareem loved to operate in half-court sets, relying heavily on his nearly unstoppable skyhook shot. No matter which way the defense tried to contain them, the Lakers had an answer for it, as Magic could dominate with his style or Kareem could dominate with his. In the late 80s, you could definitely argue that the best tandem on the Lakers was actually Magic Johnson and James Worthy, due to Kareem's slow decline in his twilight years. So in a sense, 2 of their 5 championships together actually qualify as Magic and Worthy championships from the duo perspective. In my opinion, this aspect keeps Magic and Kareem from being placed any higher than 3rd on my list. But regardless, they were still one of the greatest 1-2 punches to ever do it. Number 2, Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. If you're talking about peak ability and the individual quality of each superstar, then it probably doesn't get any better than prime Shaquille O'Neal and a young Kobe Bryant. In their first championship run, it was clear that Shaq was the significantly better player and the more productive player. But after that first title run, Kobe took a massive leap forward, and the duo operated more as a Superman and Batman type of tandem. In their 8 years as teammates, they went to the NBA Finals 4 times and won 3 NBA championships, with Shaq winning all 3 Finals MVPs. The most noteworthy championship was their historic 15-1 postseason run, where they swept through the stacked Western Conference, solidifying their argument for the title of the greatest team in NBA history. These were the stats of Shaq and Kobe during their time as teammates, and although Kobe got off to a relatively slow start, the meat and potatoes of this tandem was between the years of 2000 and 2003. Both of these players had the talent and the ability to be a championship leader on their own respective teams, which is part of the reason they butted heads so much as teammates. But that's also what made them so special, as they sometimes looked like a 1A and 1B option rather than a 1 and 2. This is my list of honorable mentions. Obviously, there's a lot of other greats here, and solid arguments can definitely be made in their favor. Should any of these duos have made it into the top 6 instead? Let me know if you believe so. Number 1, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Was there ever really a question on who would get the top spot? Sure, you could argue that tandems like Shaq and Kobe, LeBron and Wade, and Magic and Kareem were more talented duos. But from the perspective of consistency and how the stars complemented one another, it doesn't get any better than Jordan and Pippen. Depending on who you ask, Jordan is possibly the greatest scorer in NBA history. And although Pippen was never a league-leading scorer, he did consistently chip in around 20 points per game, in an era where offense was much harder to come by. But without question, their greatest strength as a duo was their all-time great perimeter defense. In their years as teammates, Jordan was first-team All-Defense 9 times, and Pippen was first-team All-Defense 6 times. They were both so elite on defense that it was a genuine debate on who the better defensive player was. And please, let me know in the comments who you believe is the better defender. Together, they won 6 championships in a span of 8 years, with Michael Jordan being the Finals MVP all 6 times. These are the career numbers of the two greats as teammates, as the two were constantly a nightmare for opposing teams on both ends of the court. Honestly, I expect my picks of 2 through 5 to be highly scrutinized, but personally, I don't see how anyone could disagree on the top spot on this list, as Jordan and Pippen remain as the model of excellence when it comes to the all-time great 1-2 punches. Number 5, the 2015 NBA Finals.
This was the first championship of the Steph Curry-led Golden State Warriors, as they caught lightning in a bottle and rode the wave all the way to the NBA Finals. The thing is, the team they faced that was representing the Eastern Conference was nowhere close to full strength, as LeBron was forced to take on Golden State as the only legitimate star available. His third scoring option, Kevin Love, had his shoulder brutally injured in the first round by Kelly Olynyk. Due to this, Kevin missed the remainder of the postseason. As if that wasn't bad enough, LeBron's co-star Kyrie Irving injured his ankle in overtime of the first game of the NBA Finals, causing him to miss the rest of the postseason as well. LeBron wasn't just short-handed, but his team was a complete shell of what they were throughout the regular season. James was so deprived of legitimate help that Cleveland's Matthew Dellavedova was elevated by the media to the image of a co-star. Somehow, LeBron willed this series to 6 games. But let's be honest, it was never a fair battle from the start, and some still see that Warriors' first championship as a fluke to this very day. Number 4, the 2006 NBA Finals. This is the famous matchup between Dirk Nowitzki and the Dallas Mavericks and Dwayne Wade and the Miami Heat. As many of you know, the Mavericks took a 2-0 series lead to start the finals, which then activated Dwayne Wade's beast mode, where he completely took over the series, heroically winning the next 4 games straight for Miami. The thing is, many people believe that this was less about the heroics of Wade and more about the sketchy refereeing. For example, in Game 3, the Heat were in danger of falling to an 0-3 series deficit and was in a must-win situation. It was an extremely close game, and down the stretch, Wade was awarded some incredibly soft trips to the free throw line, which is where the rigged narrative began. But in the crucial 5th game is where things truly became unfair. In that game alone, Wade shot an insane total of 25 free throws, and 15 of those were in the second half. The entire Mavericks team shot 25 free throws in that game. Post-game, Mavericks players were saying that they couldn't even be near Wade without being called for a foul. To this day, many people debate whether or not this was a legitimate championship for the Heat. But what certainly can't be argued is the fact that Wade was living at the free throw line that series. Number 3, the 1988 NBA Finals. This was an extremely hard-fought 7-game series between the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers and the bad boy Detroit Pistons. The reason this series could have a legitimate asterisk by it is not because of how it was played throughout, but simply because of how the last 2 games ended. In Game 6, the Pistons were leading the series 3-2, and were leading the Lakers in the game by 1 point, 102 to 101. At this point, only seconds were remaining on the game clock. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was given the ball in the post and proceeded to do his signature sky hook shot. He missed, but fortunately for Los Angeles, Bill Laimbeer was whistled for one of the most controversial calls in basketball history, what has since been known as the Phantom Foul. As you can see by the replay, there is barely any contact, and Laimbeer was absolutely stunned by the call. Kareem would go on to make both free throws, and instead of Detroit winning the championship that night, the series was extended to a 7th game. In that 7th and deciding game, things got even weirder in favor for Los Angeles. With only 12 seconds left in the game, the Pistons were down by 4 points, when Bill Laimbeer hit a clutch 3-pointer to decrease the lead to 1 point. The ball was then inbounded to the cherry-picking AC Green, who makes the open layup and increases the lead to 3. Now understand, it's still a 1-possession game, there's 2 seconds left on the clock, and the Pistons could easily tie up this game with a 3-pointer like they had just made. Unfortunately, they were never truly given a chance. As Laimbeer is inbounding the ball, players and fans are already rushing the court, which should be a violation. Camera crews are standing right beside Laimbeer where they shouldn't be, yet for some reason, the refs didn't stop the action. Laimbeer then throws a perfect pass to Isaiah Thomas just for him to be tripped by Magic Johnson. The ref, who was standing right next to them, doesn't blow the whistle on Magic like he should have, and the Lakers win the game and the championship. It's hard to understand why all of this happened the way it did. Maybe it's because the league wanted the more popular Lakers to win the title. Maybe it's because the league was getting retribution for the way the bad boy Pistons had been conducting themselves. Regardless of the exact reason, this was one of the ugliest and unfair conclusions to a playoff series that the league has ever seen.
Number 2. The 2020 NBA Finals. This is all recent history, so I assume you know all the details. The 2019 to 2020 NBA season was halted 3/4 deep into the regular season due to the COVID outbreak. This caused an awkward break that lasted several months before the games were eventually resumed in the Disney bubble in Orlando. A mid-season, several-month-long break is something that we had never seen in the history of the NBA, and obviously, it was going to affect the way the games were played. Some teams and players who had tremendous momentum then started to experience rust because of the layoff, while other older teams that needed rest suddenly had an unnatural benefit to their postseason hopes. Everything felt off. Playoff basketball was being determined later into the year. Home court advantage was suddenly meaningless, as everyone was playing in empty basketball gyms, and world-class athletes were completely removed from their regular environments and from their daily routines. The Lakers went on to win the championship over the Miami Heat. But due to all of these strange variables, many people still don't see it as a legitimate championship to this very day. Number 1. The 2002 NBA Finals. The reason this series should have the biggest asterisk in NBA history is not because of what happened during the series, as the Lakers comfortably swept the New Jersey Nets in 4 games, but rather it was because of the teams who were representing the finals. Prior to that championship series, the Western Conference Finals were being played between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Sacramento Kings, 2 rival teams battling it out for the chance to play in the NBA Finals. To just about every knowledgeable basketball fan at the time, this was the series that was truly deciding the NBA championship, as these 2 Western squads were clearly the 2 best teams in the entire league. The thing is, heading into Game 6, the Kings were leading the series 3-2, when things got painfully sketchy. The game was close down the stretch, yet nearly every foul call appeared as if it was going in the Lakers' favor, as if the league was determined to get the Lakers to win the game, and of course they eventually did. Former NBA referee Tim Donaghy was convicted of a felony for betting on basketball games that he refereed. Tim did not referee this game between the Kings and the Lakers, but he did claim that the game was rigged. According to Donaghy, NBA referee Dick Bavetta was the designated fixer for the league office, and was regularly assigned to ref Game 6s where the NBA wanted to extend the series to a 7th game. Obviously, all for the sake of money. Donaghy said the fix was in, which is why the Lakers were getting head-scratching calls, like Kobe elbowing Mike Bibby and getting away with it, or Chris Webber getting the cleanest block you've ever seen called as a personal foul. If there's anything in the history of the league that ever deserved an asterisk, this would be it. Throughout the decades, there have been many different superstars who have left their long-lasting imprints on the league. With that being said, not every superstar player was so fortunate. Some players had their careers cut short before their legacy could truly get started. Today, I'm breaking down the top 10 ruined potentials of NBA history. According to me, of course. Let me make this clear. I'm not ranking this list based on how good the players were at the time their careers were cut short, but rather, I'm ranking these players based on how high I believe their potential was, compared to where their potential ended. So let's get into it. Starting off at number 10, Yao Ming. This graceful 7'6" star looked as if he was poised to have a career that put him among the greatest centers in NBA history. Not only did he have the backing of an entire major country, but Yao was far more skilled and talented than his size would suggest, as he had an incredibly soft touch and an elite mid-range game. He helped lead his Houston Rockets to the playoffs in 2 out of his first 3 seasons in the league, and was an all-star in each of those seasons. Unfortunately, it was in his 4th year in the league that he experienced his first major injury. From that point on, Yao's appearances on the court would be extremely inconsistent, as the health of his feet and knees completely betrayed him. His productivity on the court would continuously decline, and by the time he had reached his 31st birthday, he had played his final game in the NBA. Number 9. Tracy McGrady. Based on the talent he displayed during his time in the league, you would think that T-Mac would be higher on my list. The thing is, he actually had a longer and healthier career than many players on this list. considering how McGrady had already completed 8 seasons in the league before the injuries became a severe problem. With that being said, he was only 26 years old when the chronic back issues started to kick in, so there was still plenty of room for him to improve, and he's definitely worthy of being on this list. Before the injury started, T-Mac had been a scoring champion in back-to-back seasons. He had been an All-Star in 5 straight seasons, and he was even being compared frequently to Kobe Bryant for the title of the best player in the NBA. It's hard to know what they could have achieved if he hadn't had his career derailed with injuries. But considering how his Rockets pushed the world champion Lakers to 7 games in the 2009 playoffs, at least one championship for McGrady certainly isn't hard to envision. Number 8. David Thompson. He was the man known as Skywalker thanks to his remarkable athleticism, as he's constantly referred to as one of the greatest leapers of basketball history. To put it simply, this 6'4" shooting guard was one of the greatest scorers of all time. And in his first 4 years as a pro, he averaged about 26 points per game on a remarkable 51.4% shooting. One of the more special performances was when he scored 73 points against the Detroit Pistons, which included 53 points in the first half alone. David Thompson was one of the most skilled and athletic wings of basketball history, and even the great Michael Jordan drew much inspiration in his game from David Thompson, which is why he had Thompson present him into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, there was a lot of legacy-building basketball left on the table for Thompson. Leading up to his first major injury, Thompson had been the Rookie of the Year, he had been an All-Star in his first 4 seasons, and he had even won the All-Star Game MVP twice. Shortly after his injury at the age of 25, it came to light that Thompson had a severe drug addiction, which only expedited the process of him exiting the NBA. Before he reached the age of 30, he had played his final game in the league. Number 7. Brandon Roy. When he was at his best, Kobe Bryant referred to this 6'6" shooting guard as the most difficult player to guard in all of the Western Conference. He was one of the most clutch and gifted athletes in the game, as he was lethal from the perimeter and was a tremendous finisher around the rim. In his first 3 years in the league, he was the Rookie of the Year, he made multiple All-Star teams, and had established himself as one of the best closers in basketball. The thing is, we never got to see a truly healthy season from Brandon Roy, as the beginning of his injuries go all the way back to his rookie season. By his 4th year in the league, he had to undergo surgery on his knee, and before you know it, his career was in freefall, and he was out of the NBA by the age of 28. Number 6. Penny Hardaway. During an interview in the mid-90s, Michael Jordan said that Penny Hardaway was one of the players who would carry on the torch after he retired. Penny was a large 6'7" point guard who had playmaking ability that was reminiscent of Magic Johnson, but he was also a perimeter shooter who was always a threat from deep. He was an electrifying all-star and a consistent triple-double threat. Defensively, he was also one of the best pickpockets in the entire league. After missing only 5 games in his first 3 seasons, he had to undergo knee surgery, which ended up affecting much of his explosiveness. From that point on, it was all downhill from there. Sure, he went on to have a long career, retiring from the game of basketball at the age of 36, but he was quickly reduced to that of a journeyman and a role player, never reliving the glory days of his first few seasons in the league. Number 5. Maurice Stokes. Stokes was a strong 6'7" power forward who was very ahead of his time, with his incredibly strong build and his tremendous athleticism. Maurice was an All-Star and an All-NBA player in each of his first 3 seasons in the league. He was also one of the greatest rebounders of all time, as he led the league in rebounds in his rookie season with a whopping 16.3 per game. Similarly to Bill Russell, he wasn't the most skilled scorer, but he was an absolute force defensively and on the boards. He also had tremendous court vision for a power forward, as he was always among the league leaders in assists per game. He was a gifted young player who had the basketball world at his fingertips. Unfortunately, in his first ever playoff game in 1958, Stokes had one of the worst accidents in all of basketball, as he leaped over the top of the defender and landed on his head, which ended up paralyzing him for life. Jack Twyman, who was an NBA Hall of Famer and a former teammate of Stokes, said that if this accident never happened, he believed that the duo of Oscar Robertson and Maurice Stokes would have made the Cincinnati Royals the dynasty of the 1960s, instead of the Boston Celtics. Number 4. Grant Hill. Many NBA legends have referred to Grant Hill as the LeBron James before LeBron James, in the sense that he was a strong, quick, athletically gifted forward who could handle the ball like a dynamic guard. He was also a consistent triple-double threat, and after his first 6 seasons in the league, he had amassed these totals in points, assists, and rebounds. In the history of the NBA, only Oscar Robertson, Larry Bird, and LeBron James had eclipsed these numbers in their first 6 seasons in the league. Unfortunately for Hill, it was at the end of that 6th season, at the age of 26, where he severely sprained his ankle, which is the injury that would haunt him throughout his career. In later years, he did manage to reinvent himself as a solid contributing role player, with only a fraction of the explosiveness. But regardless, his talent and potential remains as one of the greatest what-ifs of NBA history. Number 3. Bill Walton. Bill is an interesting case because although he already built a championship Hall of Fame legacy in his short career, it still could have been so much more. In the history of the league, I don't believe there's ever been a more injury-prone player than Bill Walton, as the man was constantly fracturing bones all over his body. His injury history is enough to make even Anthony Davis blush, as he was always getting surgery for his broken legs and feet, starting as early as high school. Despite having a body made of glass, Walton was one of the most impressive centers on the court. In his first 4 seasons in the league, he was a rebounding champion, he was a blocks champion, he made 2 all-defense teams, he was a league MVP, he was an NBA champion, and he was the finals MVP. He was an elite passer for a big man, and he was one of the all-time great rebounders and rim protectors. Although he dragged his career out until his mid-30s, he was never able to play a prime season without injuries. One can only imagine the kind of resume this man would have built if he was never cursed with arguably the most frail body that the game has ever seen. Number 2. Derrick Rose. At the time tragedy struck, Derrick Rose was younger than most of the players on this list. When he was with the Chicago Bulls, the 6'3" point guard was one of the most explosive players that the game had ever seen. His elite combination of speed, quickness, and leaping ability made him an absolute menace in fast break situations, and around the rim, he established himself as one of the all-time great finishers. After a monstrous season where he led the Bulls to a 62-20 record in 2011, he was rewarded with a league MVP at the age of 22, which made him the youngest MVP winner in the history of the NBA. Usually, superstar players win their first MVP award when they're around 8 to 10 years older, yet Rose was already in the mix of the best players in the league, despite being one of the youngest players in the game. At this point, his potential seemed off the charts, as the Bulls appeared as if they were on their way to being perennial contenders. But in the first game of the 2012 playoff season, Derrick Rose tore his ACL, which forever hindered the explosiveness that he once had in his youth. Despite returning to the court, Rose would never be an MVP candidate again, and he never even returned to an NBA All-Star game for that matter. Number 1. Len Bias. One of the greatest athletic potentials that the game has ever seen also turns out to be one of the most tragic stories of sports history. Len Bias was a 6'8" forward out of the University of Maryland, who had a deep bag of skills. He was an athletic and strong force, and he had a smooth mid-range jumper, and was a tremendous rebounder. For a player who was only in his early 20s, Bias appeared as if he had already grown into his fully matured man body, which only led people to further imagine what kind of athlete he would be in his eventual prime. Bias wasn't just merely a great basketball player, but he was good enough to go toe-to-toe with Michael Jordan, as the two players regularly had epic battles in college. Not only did the stars appear to be great adversaries, but they looked as if they would one day have a great rivalry in the NBA. Thanks to a major trade several years earlier, the defending champion Boston Celtics had the second overall pick in the 1986 NBA draft, and they used the pick to take the highly anticipated Len Bias, setting him up to learn under the wing of Larry Bird, while immediately competing for championships. Tragically, just hours after being drafted by the Celtics, Len Bias passed away due to drug use that caused him to have a fatal seizure. Again, there's no guarantee that he would have developed into a star at all, but based on his talent in college, based on his level of competition, and based on the situation he was heading into, I'm very comfortable putting him in the number 1 spot on my list. Let's face it, there's not much new under the sun. Nowadays, people love to act like everything is the greatest thing of all time, or at the very least, it's the first time we've ever seen this particular thing. Oftentimes, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Today, we're looking at my list of the top 10 players in the NBA today, and then I'll dig throughout NBA history to find the player who's most similar to that particular superstar. Not necessarily from a production standpoint, but more so based on their playstyle, their build, and their skill set. Obviously, these are my comparisons based on my own experience, so let me know in the comments if you think there is a better comparison than the one I'm making. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with a player who's just on the edge of my top 10, Damian Lillard. To me, the player who's most similar to Lillard is the former Cavaliers All-Star, Mark Price. In many ways, this point guard was the prototype to Damian Lillard, in the sense that he was a solid blend between scoring and facilitating while being one of the best three-point shooters in the entire league. Just like Lillard, he was extremely dangerous as a three-point shooter, coming off of screens, shooting off the dribble, and shooting in transition. He also had tremendous range that shouldn't be taken for granted. Even his circumstances were somewhat similar to Lillard, as he was constantly leading his small market team to be playoff contenders, just like Dame did for the Blazers for many years. Ultimately, it remains to be seen if Lillard is able to do something that Price was never able to do, and that's win a championship before he retires. Next up is Kevin Durant. Now, I don't hear this comparison much, but for me, it's a rather obvious one, and that's Dirk Nowitzki. When it comes to their offensive skills, these two legends are nearly identical. They're both 7-footers who are lethal three-point assassins. Both forwards are capable of making a play for themselves offensively, but also neither of them were known to be tremendous facilitators, as it was rather clear that they both had a shoot-first mentality. Even as 7-footers, neither player was ever considered as an elite rebounder. Although you always had to be wary of their three-point shooting, you also couldn't play them in too close, because either player was capable of taking you off the dribble and punishing you with their mid-range game. Not to mention how they both have a fadeaway jump shot that is near impossible to contest. Next in my top 10 is LeBron James. Now let me be clear, there has never been a player exactly like LeBron. When it comes to his speed, his size, and his ability to score and pass, he's truly one of a kind. But at least in some aspects, a player who is extremely similar to LeBron is the former New York Knicks superstar Bernard King. This guy was a strong 6'7" small forward, and in a similar fashion to King James, Bernard King was an absolute nightmare for defenses in transition. If he was charging full steam towards the basket, you couldn't do much but simply get out of the way. But he wasn't just a brute, as the man had solid footwork and a reliable jumper, making him, for a while, one of the best scorers in the entire league. In fact, to this very day, he's the Christmas Day record holder for the most points ever scored, as he dropped a remarkable total of 60 in 1984. Unfortunately, he didn't have the passing ability or the health of LeBron, as his significant knee issues greatly shortened his career. But when it came to Bernard as an offensive weapon, these two kings were nearly one and the same. Now let's take a look at Anthony Davis. Stylistically, the player who seems most similar to me is a guy he actually competed against, Kevin Garnett. Both players could play at the center position, but ideally, they both preferred the power forward spot. Whether it was on offense or defense, neither of these guys played bully ball in the paint. but they mostly relied on their solid skills, their elite footwork, and the more finesse aspects of their game. You wouldn't want either guy shooting a tremendous amount of three-pointers, but in the post with their backs to the basket, they're just about as dangerous as anyone. Then you look at the defensive end of the court, and it's more of the same, as both of these 6'10 bigs were intimidating forces around the painted area. The one major thing that they didn't have in common is the fact that AD has the fragility of a Chinese teacup and KG does not. Next up is Jason Tatum. I won't spend a tremendous amount of time on this one, because the answer is obvious, even if it's cliche. The most similar star player to Tatum, based on their playstyles, was Kobe Bryant. You look at his build, his dribble, his fadeaway jumper, and even how he sticks out his right leg on his jump shot, and the similarities are undeniable. The biggest difference is probably how Kobe excelled on the defensive end of the court, but regardless, on offense, they're a chip off the same block. Now we'll take a look at Joel Embiid. Especially when you look at his skills in the post, the most similar former star that I can think of is Hakeem Olajuwon. Both centers had tremendous footwork, both were among the best mid-range scorers in the league, and both were shot-blocking machines on the defensive end of the court. Although each center might have had occasional displays of power, their bread and butter was their more fundamentally focused style of play. There are some significant differences, like for one, Embiid was actually a threat from three-point range, and although they were both great shot contesters at the rim, if we're being completely honest, Hakeem is completely in a class of his own. Next up is Luka Doncic. The comparison I hear over and over again is Luka and Larry Bird, and although those two players have some similarities, I don't think it's the most accurate comparison based on their play styles. If I'm being completely honest, I think the comparison is more influenced by the fact that they're two really great white players who are sometimes considered as underwhelming athletes. I don't give a damn about the color of their skin, but I care more about how they play. So for me, the more apt comparison is the 1990s superstar Penny Hardaway. Just like Luka, Penny was a 6'7" combo guard, who usually operated as the team's floor general. Luka is also an extremely ball-dominant player who looks to make a play for himself or for others, instead of naturally fitting within a team system. And that is a description that's far better suited for Penny than it is for Bird. Just like Luka, Penny was a triple-double threat who could score, distribute, rebound, and had a tendency to shoot a lot of three-pointers. Statistically, neither Luka or Penny were elite three-point shooters from an efficiency standpoint, while Larry Bird was one of the best of his era, which again is yet another reason why these two are the more appropriate comparison. Now let's take a look at Steph Curry. I'm not the first person to make this comparison, but I certainly recognize that Steph has an extremely similar playstyle to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. This 6'1" point guard was a tremendously impactful player for the Denver Nuggets in the 1990s. He never reached his full potential, and the common belief among basketball circles is that he was blackballed out of the NBA due to his public displays of his religious faith. As far as his basketball skills, Mahmoud had a stellar handle of the basketball and was fantastic at creating space between him and his defender. Everything from his hesitation dribble to his crossover to his pull-up jumper and his three-point shooting just screamed Steph Curry before Steph Curry. Even Steph himself has given a tremendous amount of credit to him, saying that he was the prototype to his game. Next up is Giannis. Very few players in NBA history have had the combination of size, strength, length, and the agility that Giannis does. To me, one of the most similar players that I could suggest may come as a surprise to many younger basketball fans, but I believe it's Shaquille O'Neal, specifically in his youth as a member of the Orlando Magic. This version of O'Neal was similar to Giannis in the sense that he had very lean muscle and was very quick and athletic. Around the time that Shaq joined Los Angeles, he put on a tremendous amount of weight and relied more heavily on simply overpowering players in the painted area. But in Orlando, the slimmer Shaq was very capable of grabbing the rebound and taking it coast to coast all by himself to finish the play, which is something that Giannis does on a regular basis. With their length and athleticism, both players were very good at covering a lot of ground defensively in a short amount of time. Just don't ask either of them to shoot a free throw with the game on the line. Lastly, let's take a look at the Joker, Nikola Jokic. A pretty decent comparison is actually another legend from overseas, Arvydas Sabonis. But the thing is, Sabonis was not quite an elite facilitator like Jokic is. So instead, I'm going with another NBA champion, Bill Walton. Just like the Joker, Walton was a 6'11 center who could score, who could rebound, and who was among the best passers in the entire league, regardless of the fact that he played at the 5 spot. From a legacy standpoint, the players are also incredibly similar. Each all-time great big was an MVP winner, a Finals MVP winner, and provided the only championship that their franchise has ever won. Both guys operated like a point center, as they would often dictate the offense from the post and make plays either for themselves or for their teammates. The two major differences was the fact that Walton was much better at the defensive end of the court, and the other aspect was the unfortunate reality that Jokic had much better durability, as Walton was arguably the most injury-prone player in the history of the game. So what do you guys think? Who's a current NBA player who reminds you of someone from generations past? I look forward to hearing your suggestions in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.